All right, this time we'll call the September 9th City Council meeting to order. Would you please call roll? Would we all please stand and say a pledge allegiance? I'm sorry, I just got back in town. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Zito, would you call roll, please?
Vice Mayor Borelli.
Here.
Mayor Hagan.
Here.
Councilmember Patton.
Here.
Councilmember Thomas.
Here.
Councilmember Wilkins.
Here.
All right, thank you. Do we have any announcements or presentations to the public?
Did this work? Can I?
Yes.
I would like to remind everyone that this Saturday on Main Street in Placerville is I don't even know how many years he's been doing it, is the annual Casey's Ride for Hope to end domestic violence in our area. It's a fundraiser for the Center for Domestic Free Relationships. It's a motorcycle ride. It starts at 8 o'clock. The motorcycles leave Placerville sometime between 10:30 and 11, and it's an incredibly moving sight when the thousands of bikes that line up on Main Street go roaring out, go up Main Street to Bedford, and they get on Highway 50. They ride all the way up to Tahoe to Echo Summit. Actually, they take off on 89 and go over to Luther Pass to Hope Valley. And then on 88, they go back to Carson Pass, and they end up in Diamond Springs in the mid to late afternoon for a barbecue and more fundraising and trophies for the various bikes. It's an incredible fundraiser. Pat Barron's sister was killed from domestic violence, and it's in memory of her that he started doing this annual motorcycle ride. And even if you don't ride, it's not only is it a tremendous social benefit, it is also really moving when all those bikes take off. So I highly recommend anybody to come down between 10:30 and 11 and see the bikes and show your support for this cause.
Thank you very much. Any other announcements? Seeing none, I'll move to the next item. Just a second, we'll have public comment. But go ahead and have a seat. There are no closed session reports, sir. Adoption of the agenda. Any changes to the agenda?
Move the adoption.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passed unanimous. Ceremonial matter. I have a short declaration that basically declaring September 17th through the 23rd as Constitution Week in the city of Placerville, and that will be presented to them at the library. I believe that's around noon, 12:30, 1 o'clock on that date, on the 17th. Okay, any public comment time? This is brief, non-agenda items. Be limited to 3 minutes, and the council may not take any action on these unless they're deemed an emergency by the council and we have a 4/5 vote. First of all, any written communication?
Mayor and council, there was one document presented to the city clerk from Mr. Kirk Smith tonight. I'm assuming maybe he's going to address that under public comments, but this was addressed to you, the mayor, from Mr. Kirk Smith that we received tonight.
Okay, thank you. And okay, under oral communication, now you can go ahead and stand up and say a few words. If you have any written documents, you'd give those to the clerk, please. Oops. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, I am Ryan Hughes, and I'm here to talk a little bit about Hangtown Hunger Walk. And written information goes to who? Yep.
Hangtown Hunger Walk? Okay.
So in years past, there has been a crop walk, and that has gone to support both the hungry of the world and the hungry of El Dorado County. Now, Hangtown Hunger Walk, we have decided to change the crop walk just a little bit, give it a new name, rebrand it. And instead of 2/3 of the money going out of the county, we decided that it'd be a great idea. Right now, El Dorado County is hurting pretty bad with all the hunger and all of the needs for some of our poverty-stricken people. So all of the money that is raised by this walk will go to the poverty-stricken that are in El Dorado County. So none of this money is going to leave El Dorado County. We have partnered with the food bank and its 35 other agencies. The walk will be held on October 26th, and registration will be at 1 p.m. at Benham Park. We'll walk up to Save Mart and walk back. I just wanted to bring this to your guys' attention.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
My name is Al Bolf, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'm from 11482 Ridge Road in Nevada City. I'm speaking to you tonight for the head druid of the Bay Area, Rodney Carr. He asked me to come up here and speak to you about the importance of maintaining the Druid monument where it is. I don't know if you know, the Druids go back, they were a scholarly class of the Celts, the ancient Celts. They go back over 4,000 years. And Druid means wise oak. They, in times of scarcity of food, they made bread out of the acorns of the oak tree. And the oak tree also sustained them for keeping their fires warm, building their boats, and also their houses. And he asked me to come up here and speak to keep the Druid monument where it is. And I don't know if you know, there are Druid monuments at Bolinas and Point Arena, as well as in the Bay Area. So it's a very important historical site, and I have a song of the Druids, which I'll give to your clerk to pass out to you.
Just don't expect us to sing it tonight.
It's translated from ancient Welsh. Yes, and to maintain the uniqueness, and we're fighting the same urbanization that you are up in Nevada County. We're trying to maintain our historical spots and unique places, and to draw people from the Bay Area who want to escape their urbanization and step back in time. So it's very important to not only maintain the Druid monument where it is and other spots in your community, the historic environment, to preserve it. It's if you want to keep generating money to pay for your infrastructure, maintenance, and improvements, then we need to have people come up and spend their money in our prospective areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Kirk Smith, City of Placerville. On the subject of that same matter, the controversy that's been around for about 8 years, those who proposed the changes up here at the end of the street have all described it as all but like a magic elixir, and I would call it snake oil. But both opinions are derived and drawn from reasonable inferences from the same set of facts. So I think it's very important not to demonize people just because they have a difference of views, as was apparently the case last week. And I'm referring to the statement I didn't hear about until the following night when I came in to the scoping meeting and was confronted by a number of supporters of one candidate who each expressed their displeasure in very clear terms. So just to let you know, I've sent a letter so that you have a chance to go beyond my 3 minutes. It seems that when you're describing and trying to respond to something that covered nearly half hour, you can't expect it to happen in 3 minutes. But the statement that caused offense was a flyer I wrote. And by the way, it's absolute nonsense as you look at me and this face and my profile to ever think that I could possibly be anonymous anywhere, let alone in this small town. Every message I sent out to about a dozen persons by email had my name on it in two ways. One's my address, as explained in a footnote, and the other was in the signature block, but I delivered about 40 copies to merchants, vendors, and residents of the shopping on Saturday. And the significance is that not any one of them had ever heard of the scoping meeting. So I'm glad to have helped you do your job. The thing that prompted some offense was the quote, "This work is being done as the result of a biased $200,000 environmental impact study on the roundabout options pushed last October by Councilmember Wendy Thomas while serving as mayor, even though she also sat on the board of directors of Marshall Hospital, that is the biggest user of Cedar Ravine with an estimated 3,000 cars traveling daily through the same Main Street Cedar Ravine intersection," close quotes. The statement's true. It's not behind your back. I actually stated it from this very position on December the 10th. And I'd actually urge you to look at that colloquy so you can get the context of all of what it's raised. Anybody who drew an inference of skullduggery or venality is nonsense. Because I've told all of you at various times that I respect all of you. I've said that none of you are corrupt, corruptible, that you're all honest, honorable people. I think it's very important for us in public life to make sure that the public understands what these rules are about, because they're not quite as simplistic as they're sometimes described. So when I raised it in a very honest, open, straightforward way, I thought the response didn't look like it was particularly a welcome wagon treatment. It was referred to the city attorney, who said that it's not a problem because you don't get paid to be on the board. So I did raise it with you, and nobody seemed to show any interest in following up with the usual question like, do you have any, does that answer your question? And the answer is it doesn't. And the reason is that when you're on the board of directors, and believe me, you folks are, sincere and you work hard. I could describe all kinds of qualities individually for you. But the fact is that when you're on the board of directors, you have a fiduciary responsibility to serve that board. And it's hard to do to two masters at the same time. So after this got this response last time, I called up about a half a dozen law professors who teach ethics at local law schools in the area. One of them is Cruz Reynoso, professor of law emeritus at UC Davis School of Law and a former California State Supreme Court justice. So I've given you the benefit of his answer. When he first gave me an answer in that first phone call, it was quick, clear, and unwavering. But he said he'd go to his staff and have them do research. And when he came back to call me a few days later, he said he wasn't going to bother to write a long letter analysis because the prevailing authority is very strong and persuasive. Whether you agree with that position or not, the point is it's a legitimate question to raise, and it's not wise to demonize your opponent. So I've gone to great lengths to describe to you not only his quote, but also to give you the background of those reasons. And then even then, after talking to those professors, I went through some files and found a number of instances in which the reports, like on the hospital up here, that talks about the mitigation impact. So my estimate of 3,000 is very understated when you have a report talking about mitigation of the new expansion up there on Marshall Way. I don't have a time clock.
Yeah,
So you want to tell
your
me?
time's up, basically. Do you have something else to add to your letter?
Yeah.
We're going to look at your letter and we'll respond.
Pardon, the last part?
We'll respond.
Oh, I
Thank
was
you.
going to suggest this, to make it simple. In my letter, common idea,
Well,
wrapping it up, two things. One is, I'll be glad to come here tonight, next week, tomorrow night. You want to talk about these things? Be glad to do it. I just think it would be better that it's not done from the dais, from people engaged in campaigning, because it doesn't look right. Again, one of
that's
your...
what I was thinking.
Pardon?
That's what I was thinking. So, thank you very much.
And the last point that's very important, Carl, to make sure it's understood that it's not an adversarial fashion, is that rather than describe...
The way it sounds to me, but go ahead.
Beg your pardon?
It sounds adversarial to me.
Difference of opinion sometimes do come off that way.
That's right.
Like proponents of the roundabout. But what I was going to suggest is that instead of letting Washington and some state capital like Sacramento push us around and tell us their plans, we've got somebody who faces the same problem over in Nevada City. So why not get federal programs and state programs that are geared towards the needs of this community? Like, wouldn't it be nice?
That's what we did. Thank you, sir.
I'd look
Do we have any other public comments?
Good evening, Evelyn Veerkamp, Placerville. I think possibly last week we were all done a favor because it led to bringing clarity to this conflict of interest issue. And as Cruz Reynoso said, quoted by Kirk Smith, whether a board member is paid or not paid does not affect the issue of whether there is a conflict of interest. As a member of the hospital board, the mayor would have a duty, or any council member or official of the city, would have a duty to the hospital whether or not the mayor was paid for those services, and at the same time, the mayor has a duty to the residents of the city. So we seem to be reaching some clarity on that. I had said to Councillor Thomas in some correspondence by email this past week that the flyer which he had talked about last week had suggested a perplexing conflict of interest question not answered by standard texts. And it's not easy to go to the ordinary leaflets that we are able to access to get an answer to the question, but I think we're getting closer. And in the same way that we're getting closer to an answer to the question about conflict of interest, raised outside this meeting venue last week was also the issue of the Brown Act and whether and what kinds of announcements unagendized are permitted and whether or not there had been a Brown Act violation. I don't have clarity on that.
I'm sorry, I lost you on that. A Brown Act clarification on what?
Sorry, I was not clear. Thank you for asking for clarification. What kinds of announcements, for example, can come under agenda, what kinds of non-agendized announcements can come under item 3 of the agenda? Because the Brown Act itself says that the agenda of the City Council or any other legislative body shall contain a brief general description of each item of business to be transacted or discussed.
The announcements are very clear. It
Yeah,
says
we'll get there.
announcements and presentations to the public. And that's would be announcements from the City Council. In this case, I asked the gentleman to come up during public communication, oral communication. I think that's very clear. There's a differential there. If staff or if this council has an announcement to make, I believe that's what that number 3 stands for. As long as I've been on this council, almost 10 years, that has been the process.
I will agree with you that
Thank
has
you.
been.
Now,
I'm not finished, and you've used up a fair portion of my time.
And I may shut you off in a minute unless you have
I'm
gone to
fairly
some
sure
other
you
option.
will shut me off.
Do you have something else you want to
Yes,
talk
I'm
about?
completing my thought, and it won't take me but a minute.
Thank you.
May I?
Please.
Because the Brown Act says the agenda shall contain a brief general description of each item. No action or discussion shall be undertaken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda, except that members of a legislative body may respond briefly, as you've said, to statements made or questions posed by persons exercising their public testimony under section whatever. In addition, as you've said, a member of a legislative body may ask a question, may make a brief announcement, etc. The question is, what is an announcement? Traditionally, in this chamber, an announcement has been something like Main Street Matters, or a police officer or another employee has been recognized, but is responding to something in the media that a official takes offense to. Is that actually a legitimate announcement? There is not clarity on that, so this is a legitimate discussion.
So again, I think we can answer that question for you.
And no, what I'm going to say, I'm sure you do have an answer, but like Kirk Smith has done in following this up with legal authorities, I think because there is dispute and lack of clarity about what an announcement is, it will be really good to follow this up in the same way, and we will do that.
What an
Thank
announcement
you.
is. I think it's very clear what an announcement is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Boy.
Kathy Parker, that's my maiden name. Kathy Lishman, City of Placerville.
That's all right.
I think to come up here and try to slander Mrs. Matson now for something she said last week is Thomas. I got the names really mixed up today. Is really interesting. And the fact that someone in Berkeley was contacted about a conflict, it doesn't even say how far away the hospital is. So I'm not going on the assumption that Mrs. Thomas has a conflict, and I don't think the public should either.
Anybody else wishing to speak at this time? Seeing nobody approaching the dais, we'll attempt to answer a couple of those questions.
I gather you're looking at me, Mayor.
Yes,
First, let me take on the last comment about the Brown
Please.
Act violation. And agendized items under the Brown Act are the only items that can be acted upon by the council. An announcement, whether you call it an announcement or you call it a comment, is not an item for which action was going to be taken, and no action was taken. So, in my opinion, respectfully, there was not a Brown Act violation by the comments that Councilmember Thomas made at the last meeting. Moving on to the issue of a conflict of interest, I've read Mr. Smith's letter. I've read the letter he got from former Justice Reynoso. Opinions of attorneys depend a lot upon the information they are given. And in this case, I have no idea what information was given to Mr. Reynoso for the basis of his opinion. But the gravamen of his opinion was that in order to have a conflict of interest, you don't have to be paid. And that's correct. There are two types of conflicts of interest, in a sense. One is the statutory or regulatory one that the FPPC regulates, and that is where you have a financial interest in a matter that is before a body, whether it's a property, a financial interest as a result of a property interest that you own, whether it's because of a relative, whether it's because of an income source. Those are the kinds of financial conflicts of interest which require not only abstinence from a vote, but also recusal in many instances. There is a secondary type of conflict of interest, which is called a common law conflict of interest. That is one where a member of a legislative body might have a bias or a prejudice against a particular item that comes before them. That's not a statutory conflict of interest. And many times they don't have a bias, but there's a perception of that because of circumstances that may be in place. That's up to the individual to make a determination as to whether or not they are prejudiced, biased, or have some sort of feeling regarding a particular issue because of a relationship that may cause them to render a unfair decision, and one which is not objective. In the case of the action which Mr. Smith complains of in October of last year, when Councilmember Thomas was mayor, if I recall that action correctly, and I'm not saying I remember it 100%, but I believe it was an action to select the consultant for the environmental report. That had nothing to do with a selection of a alternative or what construction would take place. It was simply a selection of the consultant to prepare the environmental report ordered by the court if the city was to go ahead with a project at Cedar Ravine, Maine, and Clay Street. Whether it be a roundabout, whether it be a four-way stop, whether it be replacement or repair of the bridge, whether it be bisecting the parking lot, any of those things were part of the original project, and the court ordered an EIR if we were to go ahead with that. So it really had nothing to do with the roundabout. It had to do with the environmental report that the court ordered. The selection of the alternative hasn't even come before this council, and it won't come until the environmental report is completed. But as long as we're talking about that, there is also an exception. While Councilmember Thomas may sit on the Marshall board, first, it's my understanding Marshall has no position with respect to whether that intersection is improved or not. Secondly, and perhaps most telling and important, is that that intersection affects a whole lot of people in this community, and not just Marshall Hospital. It affects most of the citizens of this community who use Cedar Ravine. It affects people in the county. It affects people going to the school up there, to the church up there. There are other avenues to get to Marshall Hospital. So when an item affects so many people, just as if you have a council member, let's say, voting on an increase in, or a decrease, as the case may be, in water rates, it affects that council member, sure, directly, but it also affects everybody else in the community. And so when it's that sort of an effect, if there is one, it's de minimis, and it would not necessarily constitute a conflict of interest.
That would almost be similar to, we just completed a project of striping our streets, which we do pretty regularly. And there's, I believe, 20-some miles of streets that we stripe. So to have us recuse ourselves and not vote on, accept that contract, because we are on this council and because we own property within 300 feet of a street that's happened to be getting new paint, wouldn't necessarily be a thing. And that's the same kind of a conflict that I've heard of over the years.
To carry your example one step further, and
Yeah.
if you have a repaving of Cedar Ravine, or a striping of Cedar Ravine, arguably it affects Marshall Hospital, arguably affects everybody that uses the street.
Schools.
Does a council member have to recuse himself on that? No, because it is such a general nature.
Right. Thank you. I hope that answers your questions, Ms. Veerkamp and Mr. Smith. No. No. I said I hope that answers your questions. We're beyond the public comments. Thank you. And at this time, we're at the consent calendar, item 8, 8.1 through 8.6. Do any member wishing to pull an item or ask a question of staff?
I'll move we accept the consent calendar.
Sec-
And, you could just say you're going to vote no on that one item if you want, because you're absent. So we have a motion and a second?
I didn't hear a second.
I said second. Tricia.
Oh, Tricia.
No.
Not yet. Just a second. I'll call for public comment on the consent calendar. So any comments, questions? Okay, no, staff, none. Any public comments on the consent calendar, any one of the items 8.1 through 8.6?
Ask that the statement that was waved in the air last time as part of the record to go with the agenda, so that people know what was talked about, particularly when it referenced me by referring to the issue about character.
I believe the documents that we had were correct, and if, I'll ask the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we need to make any, was there, because there was no reference on any names on anything that we had, did we?
Not that I'm aware of. The note that
And you weren't-
Mrs. Councilmember Thomas was referring, we did not see a sender from that. That's why we use the word anonymous in that. And also, these are action minutes.
Right.
We basically only say statements that are neutral. We don't attach a for or against when people are speaking. We just list their names. And so we try to be as, I wouldn't like to use the word vague, but we have to be very generic in the way that we handle, say, Councilmember Thomas addressed the public regarding, and we make it very broad.
Right.
We're not here to get into the detail. The only thing that we get into detail on are the actions that you take
All right.
with a motion and a second.
Thank you. Okay, at this point,
I have a couple of questions on 8.5, where we are doing a change order to adjust the sewer manholes to grade as part of the interchange project. It seems like that this was ever overlooked. Seems like something that should not have been overlooked. Adjusting manholes to the grade is part of almost any project like this, so this should have been part of the original. And every change order that we do adds to the costs. So I'm a little concerned that this wasn't caught a long time ago, and it seems a little bit like sloppy work that it was not done. Okay, and on 8.6, I have a question of, did the sidewalk and bike path that was part of this project also get done? Because it doesn't say anywhere whether those were actually accomplished as part of the accomplishments, but they were listed as things that were supposed to be part of that project.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Michael Drobish of Placerville. Sorry, I came straight from work, so I didn't get a chance to. But on 8.4, the execute the notice of completion for Western Placerville interchanges. I asked before if it could be fixed, but where they carve out into the asphalt to sink the lane reflectors down in there, they're overly wide, and they're quite annoying, and they're kind of like brand new man-made potholes. And I could see a potential risk to motorcyclists or small vehicles. And Nate did say that they were carved out wider than state standards. So I was just wondering, any last chance before notice of completion that those could get filled in a little bit more? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, seeing nobody else approaching, bring it back to the council. Any council members have any questions? Yes, and yes, councils, you have questions? Can you answer the?
Do we need some answers to this?
Yeah, let's get a couple of answers to Sue's questions, and I think we answered 8.1. I'm sorry, I didn't
Well,
took them out of order.
And I'm looking at Susan here, but if it's the desire of the council, we could attach both the anonymous memo that was referred to and Councilmember Thomas's statement to the minutes.
That's
I
not
think
this.
you're making a,
I think that's.
It's up to the council.
I say that's, we typically do what do you call them? Action minutes.
Right.
So we don't typically go into that much detail, so I don't see any
We
reason
don't
to
normally
that.
do narratives or
And not only that, we have some people that are running for office, and I don't think this is a place, we don't want to put them in the city minutes. We don't want one candidate says this, another candidate says this. I mean, I think that's just inappropriate use of the minutes.
On item 8.5, Ms. Rodman referred to, this is actually not a change order. This is in preparation for Phase 1B, which we have not done. This is a utility agreement which we are adopting so that we can do Phase 1B. We have the funding for it, and we'll be going out to bid in the near future. Is that correct, Pierre? I want to
Right.
look at you.
I know that's correct.
So
That is correct.
so it's not a change order
Right.
to raise
Right.
those manholes, so.
And item 8.6, the sidewalks, Cumbelic Road widening and resurfacing. I think the sidewalks they're talking about are the sidewalks that are further up the street that were cut, and ADA access was, had to be rechanged at the one intersection up there, one or two intersections. Is that
I
correct?
think Pierre can answer.
Oh.
That is correct, but I'm having trouble. Having technical difficulties.
With your mic, oh.
Maybe he can go over there and use the podium. Come up here to the podium, use one of ours.
Pierre, do you want to just go to the podium and answer it for now?
This one.
Oh, that's a good idea.
1, 2, 3.
It's on.
Testing.
Pierre was ready to move. All right, Pierre. Thank you, Pierre.
Okay, so what was the question there on
I don't remember.
8.6?
Sidewalk, and it has to do with, which one? 8.6 on Campbellic Road, and it had to do with, the question was on sidewalks. And, yeah, was it, is there more sidewalks, I guess, is that the question?
The question is, there was originally supposed to be some sort of sidewalks and bike path.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay. I take back my sloppy work comment because it sounds like it's actually getting done ahead of time, which is really good. So I'll change that comment to say congratulations for 8.5. And 8.6, I was just wondering, because part of doing the Campbellic work project, or work on that road, as I understood it, was to put in a bike lane and a sidewalk. And I was wondering if those actually got done, because it doesn't say anything about it in here, but I thought that was supposed to be part of this road widening, that was to include room for a bike path and a sidewalk, and those were supposed to be part of the project.
Thank you.
Okay, the sidewalk was not part of the project. The project was basically to provide for enough widening to accommodate a Class 2 bike lane. And a Class 2 bike lane, that's actually where we stripe a designated portion of the road then for the bikes, as opposed to a Class 3, which would share the bike line with automobiles, with vehicles.
Thank you. And then the sidewalk part of it was the ADA work, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. That was done on Campbellic Road, further up toward Highway 49.
That's correct, where the existing sidewalk was already in place.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
Question 8.4 about the reflectors.
That had been answered before by our engineers, but I believe the cost to do it and restart that was substantial.
Right, it's my understanding with talking with Nate Stong, our previous city engineer, is that he did speak with Caltrans about that, and Caltrans was not going to remove the reflectors and then fill the divots and then re-divot and reinstall the reflectors.
Okay, thank you.
That's my understanding, but if it's the wish of the council, I can certainly
Pierre,
investigate that myself.
Pierre, I'm confused about the whole thing. I don't know what he's talking about. Could you explain it?
Yes, if you look at the reflectors there in the road that divide the lanes,
Okay.
the Caltrans will carve out a little divot so that when we have snowfall and the snowplows come through, they're not popping out the reflectors. So the reflectors are nested inside of a divot. And so these divots there are a little on the larger side, so when you cross them, you can feel them in your vehicle. And I guess the speaker was concerned about motorcycles and those kinds of things. It's my understanding that that issue was brought up with Caltrans, and Caltrans did not consider that to be a defect in the overall design. But I can certainly investigate that myself, since I was hearing it secondhand, and report back to the council.
I think we've beaten this one to death with it, not less than 3 times that Nate answered it.
Well, except that the only answer we're getting is from Caltrans, and so maybe we need to look into it and see if it is poses a dangerous thing for us in that particular situation. I mean, it might be, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but I just think that, I don't know, because I don't bicycle.
I think it's not a bicycle, it's the highway.
I just would like to interject that I do think that, I know that they're wider than any other divot on the Caltrans freeway. So if it was an error on Caltrans' fault, on Caltrans' project, then we certainly have a right to question them. And I for one, am fine with Pierre going forward, and at least just finding out if they are within the standards, the Caltrans standards, and there's nothing we can do, then so be it. But if they messed up, then I
let's
mean,
do
that's
some
good
of
money,
that.
state
Correct.
tax money being spent on a project that should be done to
Right.
design standards.
And I agree with further investigation on
So
that.
then, I'm getting we'll pull 8.4 till
Okay.
action in 2 weeks. Next.
I'll be very happy to talk to Caltrans and report back to the council.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it may not, we may not be able to get it back on the next agenda, but it'll be if not, it'll be the week after, next month. The sooner the better. So we'll pull 8.4.
But I'd recommend that you just continue it to the next, that item will be continued to your
Okay.
next meeting, and you
Does-
can vote on the other item.
All right. So
Can I just ask what will happen by pulling that? Is there like monies not being paid? Is there,
Yeah.
what?
It will delay the payment to the contractor.
Okay.
Are we gonna get charged interest on it?
So,
No,
There's no retention related to that project,
Oh, good.
just so you know.
Okay, good.
okay.
Thank you, Dave.
so do I have a change in the motion?
I agree to change the motion to reflect on this, that we're gonna
Okay.
continue
Continue
8.4.
Thank you. And is that okay with a second, Major?
Yes.
All right. So, it's been,
I believe moved by Vice Mayor Borelli and seconded by Councilmember Wilkins,
Well, yes,
that with 8.4 being continued to the September, I believe it's 23rd, City Council meeting. Vice Mayor Borelli,
aye.
Mayor Hagan,
all right.
Councilmember Patton,
I vote aye, except for on 8.1, because I wasn't here for the meeting.
you abstain on
Staying
8.1.
on 8.1, thank you.
Councilmember Patton, excuse me, Councilmember Thomas,
Aye.
and Councilmember Wilkins.
Aye.
All right, that passes. We'll move on to public hearings. Item 9.1, introduce and waive the first reading of a zoning, of an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending the provisions of Title 10 zoning ordinance of the Placerville Municipal Code to allow the employee housing in the city. Mr. Rivaz, is your
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
microphone's working fine? Good. Thank
Yes,
you.
it's working fine, thank you. This program requires that the zoning ordinance be amended to encourage the development of employee housing under the state's Employee Housing Act as a means of addressing local government land use and zoning requirements under the act for housing for seasonal farm workers. Farm workers are also considered in the housing element in state housing law as a special needs group. In accordance with the California Health and Safety Code, any employee housing consisting of no more than 36 beds in a group quarters or 12 units in spaces designed for use by single family or household shall be considered an agricultural land use for purposes of zoning. Such housing shall be subject to no more restrictions under the zoning than would an agricultural use permitted in the same zone or overlay district. No conditional use permit, zoning variance, or other zoning clearance shall be required of this employee housing that is not required of any other agricultural activity in the same zone. Such housing shall be subject to the California Building Code. The permitted occupancy of such employee housing shall include agricultural employees that do not work on the property where the employee housing is located. In accordance with the California Health and Safety Code, any employee housing provided accommodations for 6 or fewer employees shall be deemed a single-family structure within a residential land use designation. In addition, for purposes of all local ordinances, including the city's, employee housing shall not be included within the definition of a boarding house, rooming house, hotel, dormitory, or other similar term that implies that employee housing is a business run for profit or differs in any other way from a family dwelling. No conditional use permit, zoning variance, or other zoning clearance or permitting shall be required of employee housing that serves 6 or fewer employees. It is not required of a family dwelling of the same type in the same zone. To comply with the Employee Housing Act, the proposed ordinance would add a definition of employee housing small use as a residential structure providing accommodation for 6 or fewer agricultural employees as a single-family residential use. The ordinance would designate the use as permitted by right in any zone that allows single-family residential uses. In addition, the proposed ordinance would also add the definition of employee housing large use. An employee housing large use would permit employee housing consisting of no more than 36 beds in a group quarters of 12 units or spaces designed for use by single family or household as agricultural use in the residential estate zone and the city's, that is the city's lone agricultural zone. So this section is only affecting that one base zone district. This program, when implemented, would assist the city in meeting Housing Element Goal B, Policy 4, and Goal B of the Housing Element Goal C, and Policy C, 3 of Goal C. This ordinance amendment was considered by the Planning Commission at their meeting on May 6 of 2014, and they are recommending that the City Council approve the ordinance changes. And so with that, staff is recommending that the Council introduce an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending provisions of Title 10, zoning ordinance of the City Municipal Code to allow for employee housing in the city, and then 2, waive the first reading of said ordinance. That concludes staff's report. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Okay, does any council member have any questions on item 9.1?
I do.
Okay.
This is maybe just a silly question, but Pierre, this is for you. This is dealing with, they're calling it employee housing, and then in 9.2, we're dealing with single room occupancy, and in 9.3, we're dealing with supportive and transitional housing, and they're all a part of the special needs group. It seems like these 3 are kind of dealing with the same kind of need. And do we, I mean, we don't have agricultural lands within the city of Placerville. Is this a state mandate that we have to comply with, really housing for agricultural workers, even though we don't have ag lands in the city of Placerville?
The city does have one agricultural land use designation.
And so if you have one agricultural land use designation, you have to supply housing?
Actually, I should rephrase that. The city has one lone agricultural zone district.
Okay.
And to be in compliance with state law, we have to provide for employee housing as described. And basically, you're looking at, if it's employee housing of for agricultural employees of 6 or less, it'll be treated as a by right. And then we have, that's the small use, and then we have the large use where you're looking at, you know, the 36 beds or in a group quarters or 12 units or spaces that would be a single family or household as an agricultural use, as defined in the Health and Safety Code. So it is required.
Okay. If we didn't have an agricultural zone, would we have to have employee housing?
Then it wouldn't apply.
It wouldn't apply?
That's correct.
Okay. And what is the number of units that we are mandated to have by the state in order to comply with our housing element? Or we just have to identify a place?
Yeah, this is, you know, basically what the council is being asked to do is to amend the code that would allow for the ability for the property owner then to establish employee housing.
Okay, so once again, we battle this every year. We don't have to build it, we just have to identify it.
We do not have to build it. We just have to add it into our code so that we enable a landowner to be able to propose that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Pierre, and just to follow up to that, this would be allowed or considered only in that zone, correct?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to read the whole section here because it applies to a lot of different zones as well. To comply with the Employee Housing Act, the proposed ordinance would add the definition of employee housing, as I mentioned, small use, residential structure providing for accommodation of 6 or fewer agricultural employees as a single-family residential use. The ordinance would designate the use as permitted by right in any zone that allows single-family residential uses. So you're looking at the estate residential zone, RE, the single-family residential zone, R1A, single-family residential zone, R1 20,000, the single-family residential zone, R 10,000, the single-family residential zone, 6,000, and then the multifamily residential zones. And then in addition, and I think this is where the confusion was, in addition, the proposed ordinance would also add the definition of employee housing large. And so these are the larger accommodations, where an employee housing large unit would permit employee housing consisting of no more than 36 beds in a group quarters or 12 units or spaces designed for use by a single family or household as an agricultural use. And that then applies in the RE, the estate residential zone, because that's the one zone that's considered agricultural. The city has one parcel that contains approximately 21 acres that is zoned RE.
Okay.
I have
Carol had
I have a question. So, it says that they could, I mean, to me, when I read this, it's like you could build employee housing somewhere else than where the actual agricultural use is happening. And that, to me, doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, it says right here, who do not work on the property where the housing is located.
But think
That
about
is-
some
that
of the
is
farm
correct.
workers don't live on the actual property they would live.
But I thought in the county, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I just thought that the ag housing was located on the ranch where the agriculture is being done. And then, and so I have that question, is that, so you could put a small employee housing in any zone that already is zoned for single-family use, is that correct?
And that is correct.
And then you can put the large one only in the RE zone.
That is correct.
And then
Only on the properties that allow for agricultural uses.
what about employees that aren't ag? What if, okay, let's just use Marshall Hospital, one of the biggest employers of our area. So they obviously have more than 36 employees. Could they provide housing for their
Build an
employees?
apartment building.
This is only applied to agricultural employees.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? You had another question?
Tricia has.
I have one.
Oh, Tricia.
I just want to clarify. So anywhere in the city, 6 or fewer, what came to us last time, with any special need group, like we had the people in recovery, or whether it be ag, by right, 6 or fewer. So we're only doing, we only have to add it if we're going up beyond 6.
Yes, that is correct. Basically, what the state is saying that, you know, the state is usurping local authority from permitting this use if it's 6 or fewer. Just the same as the example that you used. The state preempted the city from regulating that. So if it's 6 or fewer, the city has to treat it as a single-family residential use, and therefore it's allowed by right, and we can only impose any other requirements that we would otherwise impose on a single-family use.
Okay. One more follow-up question, Pierre. You said this housing can only be used for seasonal or agricultural workers. How do we know who's in the house? Is it what's the kind of permit process, if you will? How do we regulate that?
If it's 6 or fewer, we're not
No.
regulating it.
Right.
Just
And
like-
what about the larger unit?
Larger unit, we can regulate that. That's by use permit.
Okay. And one more question on the current land that's zoned for agricultural uses. Is agriculture activity going on at this time on that parcel?
I don't believe so.
So would we have an opportunity to rezone that?
Yes, the city could initiate a rezoning of that property.
But it's okay. All right.
Thanks for your
You're
answers.
welcome.
So at this point, we'll open it up to the public for comments. Any questions, comments on 9.1?
Good evening again, Kathy Lishman. Yes, I had some of the same questions you did. First of all, why isn't the housing provided on the farm or the ranch where they work? Second of all, if it's seasonal, it means they're only there part of the year. So who determines, does that mean it's empty the other part of the year? And if we have single-family residential zones, then don't call them single-family if they can be people that aren't related up to 6 people in any single-family neighborhood. and there's no approval. But what about?
Well, there's the same approval as if there's the same approval as if you were to rent your house or remodel your house or build a house. There's
Right.
that approval process, so it's.
But it doesn't always mean the housing element's always saying new housing, new housing, new housing, when a lot of the housing for, for moderate and low income can be existing houses already. I've always said I've never had a new house, and so it's always about new housing. But this is something that could go into an existing neighborhood, in any house in an existing neighborhood. So it is kind of troublesome to me that it isn't being required to be actually on the land where the work is done. Also, the idea about the development fees, the permit processing and the development fees being reduced or something, I'm wondering if that is really something that we have to do. If there's an impact for development fees and impact for traffic, it seems that it needs to be addressed in that. We have single-family 5-acre parcels, but I'm assuming that that's different than the RE, which is agricultural. So, but it just, seems like it should be on the land where the work is done. Then one more thing, under the option, it says, table discussion of the ordinance and provide direction to staff to revise the ordinance for consideration by the city council. I guess my question is, what other options do you have? Are there other ways that you could adopt this, or is that just something that's just there because it needs to be there? Thank you.
Okay.
Staff could address some of those questions if.
Let's wait till we get all of our questions answered.
Thank you. Dennis Thomas, Placerville. It is disheartening to find that the state continues to take away or usurp our authority, and it's disturbing to me to have that continually happen within the city. My question is, do the workers have to be employed within the city limits, or can they work outside of the city limits and transition into the city for housing?
Anybody else? Okay, we'll close that. Oops.
Yeah, oops.
Sorry.
I think there's
One of these days.
This is one of those ones where there's two sides to every story. I have a daughter who's currently going to Humboldt State, and one of the part-time jobs that she could get is working on an organic farm. But she won't be living on the organic farm, but she'll be an agricultural worker as well as a student. So, but she lives in the city, in the little town of Arcata. She will be working on an adjacent organic farm for part-times to pay her living expenses. And so agricultural workers are not all fit one category.
Correct.
So if we have agricultural workers who are also trying to go to school, we have a community college here. It does charge tuition. You do have to pay for your living expenses. What about the kids trying to go to school who are trying to work? We've got the little South Fork farm, not too far out of town, over by Coloma. That's a little organic farm. We have other people who come to the farmers market who have people who work for them, but their properties are small. So they aren't going to be able to provide housing for people, but they do employ some workers. So I think that this is something that on the other hand, I can see it becoming a real problem for our police department, depending on who our agricultural workers are and how good as citizens they are. So I think it's a little bit of a two-edged sword, and I do agree with Dennis Thomas that it's too bad that the state has decided that they are going to override all the cities and tell them what we can and cannot do. That's very sad. But I would make the plea that we look at agriculture workers as a little bit broader look.
Thank you.
Just one question on the 6 beds or fewer. Who can build them? Does it have to be an agricultural business, or can just anyone build those units?
Do you mean by if the farmer hires a contractor? You're looking for
Or
self-employment?
could somebody completely disconnected from agricultural go and build these
I
units?
think we can't require, my understanding is we cannot put any more requirements on them than we would on you if you were to build a home that occupied 6 people who were special needs adults. That's what
I'm just wondering who builds the 6 beds or less. Do they have to be tied to agriculture at all?
Okay. Pierre, can you answer a couple of those questions? I'll make one more statement first. The other thing, like Sue said, not all of our ag workers that live in this community or live up the hill on some of the farms do all the work at that one place. Many of our ranchers up here, some of whom provide housing for some of their employees, do custom farming for other ranches. So they would work off of that location where they're residing. So just because they're providing housing doesn't mean they have to do all their work at the same location. They're still ag workers, and they, I don't think we want to restrict. The work has to be done in the city limits. It's wherever the employer tells them to work. I mean, just like where Dennis tells his employees to work, or I tell my employees to work. Sometimes they work at point A, or sometimes they work at point B. The Broadway and Main Street difference, Dennis, just in case you weren't sure. But can you answer those questions?
I'll try and summarize. Basically, again, we're creating 2 new definitions: employee housing small and employee housing large. The employee housing large, I'll speak to that one first because it's probably a little easier to understand. That's the 36 bed or the 12 unit. And that basically is stating that in an agriculturally zoned or a piece of property that allows for single family, that allows for agricultural uses, we would allow the larger employee housing by right. That only affects one zone district, and that's the RE, the Estate Residential District. And it's because it allows for agricultural uses such as raising and grazing of livestock, poultry, or other animals, growing and harvesting of trees, fruits, vegetables, flowers, grains, or other crops, storage, packing, or processing of agricultural products produced on the property without changing the nature of the products, sale on the property of the products produced thereon. So we just added then employee housing large. And so that would be an additional by right use in the RE zone. And a question then related to that is, what if they live in the county? Yes, they can live in the county. The city has no ability to dictate where those farm workers live. And so with regards to the small is affecting all the other residential zone districts, and it would include the large as well. So it doesn't say that you can't have a small employee housing in the RE. It's just the large ones aren't allowed in all the smaller ones, the R1 20,000 and the 6,000 and the like. So all the other residential zone districts to allow single family uses, the city will now treat employee housing that's 6 or fewer as a single family use. We're preempted from the state from regulating it any further. So really the city doesn't have any choice. And so when the council adopted the housing element, this was a program in the housing element that basically directs us to move forward to modify our codes to be in compliance with this section of the state code. And if I missed any other questions, I'll try and answer them. I can't recall there were any others.
I think you kind of answered that, but Michael Drobish's question, who can build that? Anyone could. If they have an existing house and they want to turn that into employee housing, they can do that in a single family or any of these residential neighborhoods.
That's correct. You can have an existing single family unit then be converted or just used for employee housing for 6 or fewer, or if it's a vacant piece of property that's zoned commercial, a builder, a home builder can come in and build a house and then sell it to somebody who then wants to rent it out as a employee housing for farm labor. And that can be either in the city or outside the city or what have you. For 6 or fewer, it'd be a by right use.
I'd like to make one statement on that, and then why even call it agriculture use then? If anybody can do it for any employee housing, then I think you're muddying, or the state is muddying the water by saying they're agriculture uses, because what you just said is anybody can supply employee housing in any home in a single family residence that we have today in the city of Placerville.
That is correct.
I believe, Pierre, correct me if I'm wrong, though, the only enforcement that we would have is if there's a problem at that location, and it turns out it is not agricultural employee housing, would we have some enforcement ability at that point?
I would think we would. Staff didn't, research into the enforcement aspect of it. What happens if, say, it's just a large, like, boarding house of non-agricultural employees? I would think we'd have the ability to then enforce the code.
But you were saying that you can't demand proof that they're
Right.
agriculture
Can't permit it. So.
workers.
It's very difficult, yeah.
And I just think I think this is a terrible, terrible situation. I'm sorry.
Yes. Ms.
One more question, Pierre. Now, as you stated in your staff report, our housing element is in compliance right now.
That's correct.
So we're not under a tight time frame with this element. Is that correct?
This is just one of the programs that we're trying to implement.
Right,
As
so
required by our housing element.
Is there a time frame on this program?
We will be reporting back to the state of our progress,
Okay.
but I don't know if there's a timeline for this, as there is a timeline on some of our other requirements. There is a timeline. I don't think there's a timeline on this. I'd have to look.
So would that involve a penalty at all?
So are you suggesting we continue this till
I-
next week?
Well, actually,
2 weeks?
I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we table the discussion of the ordinance and provide direction to staff to revise the ordinance for consideration by the city council. And I'd just like to say that, this is no reflection, a statement on farm workers. We are.
Or staff?
Or staff, no. Our economy, certainly largely depends on that. My concern is that we just have a small city, and that's the reality of it. And we can't be all things to all people. And our neighborhoods, are being eroded with all kinds of different uses that are being forced on us by a state agenda. So any possible way that we can maybe keep control at a local level that makes sense for our city, I'd like to look at. And if that, I'd particularly like to look at what is the option to rezone this so we don't have to comply with this particular program.
I did have a question.
Okay.
For Pierre. Where in the city is our one location that's agriculture? And second is, has it ever been used for agriculture?
I believe that one piece of property is located off of Cedar Ravine on the other side of the hill when you go down to the bottom of the hill there. So you go past Lions Park.
It's probably an old pear orchard.
Down on the other side, down below. That's just in the city, and I think that's the
And do you know
the
if it's
one
ever been
agricultural
used?
land, but I don't know anything more about it
Okay.
than that.
Cattle or
Okay.
pears or
I
something?
bet it, yeah.
I'll second
Second, the
motion from Councilmember
Wendy's
Thomas.
motion.
to table it. Is tabling the correct terminology, or is it continuation?
Continue.
Continue would be to a date certain.
Yeah.
If you want to
Okay.
table it, it would not be a date certain.
All right. Exactly. So the motion is to table, and second?
If I may add a comment,
Sure.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to add that in our certified housing element, our time frame is to amend our codes within 1 year of housing element adoption,
Which was?
which was
February.
February 11th of 2014.
So we've got a couple of months.
Yes.
Basically, to get a first and second reading. Okay, thank you. I think you've heard the concerns of the council. Yes, Mr. City Manager.
Pierre, this requires notification in the newspaper, correct?
That's correct.
This item. The only thing would be is if you wanted to try to continue it to a date, it would not require renoticing. It's
Okay.
a minor thing, but that's up to you.
Okay, I'm happy to amend my motion if,
To a date certain?
to a.
30 days?
That's fine. Maybe not next meeting, but maybe the meeting after. Pierre?
To come back to us, and I don't have a calendar. in
First
front of me.
meeting in November?
Gosh, November already? Gosh, that sounds terrible.
Second meeting in October?
October, yeah.
Just for clarification then, what is it that the council, exactly what is it you wish staff to research
Like to look at our-
regarding employee housing?
Look at our options, especially rezoning the property. Is that property being used? Contacting the property owner, and seeing, if they're planning on using it for agricultural uses, and if they would have a problem with rezoning it, so we don't have to.
I think we still have to change the definitions in the ordinance. I mean, that's, whether we have any property in that zone or not, our ordinance has to be corrected to meet state code.
Yeah, these are
Just like
text.
our building codes and other,
I just want to point out that these are just text amendments. We're not changing anything on the land other than all of a sudden all these properties have an ability to do these uses by right. But there is no option. The state's requiring this of us. I mean, if just to carry it forward for discussion, if the city would decide not to do this eventually, when we report back to the state, we could run the risk of our housing element falling into non-compliance and being decertified.
So did I misunderstand you, Pierre, that if we don't have an RE zone within the city, I understood you to say that then we don't have to
That's what I
provide
That's what I
employee
understood, too.
housing within the city limits?
That's what I understood too.
We have two types of employee housing, small and large.
Right.
So all of our residentially zoned properties can have employee housing for 6 or fewer.
Regardless if we
It's
have
only the
agricultural
large
zones?
that applies to that one property that's zoned RE.
Okay, so
that
even if we
one-
don't have an
that-
agricultural zone, then we still have to have employee housing?
The 6 or fewer, yes.
Oh, I misunderstood you.
Okay, well, my apologies for that.
Yes,
I'm
so
glad
did I.
we're
Okay.
discussing this
Oh,
further.
We all
Okay.
misunderstood.
Yeah.
So
so
you,
would you like to withdraw your motion?
well, I just want to be, I want it to be absolutely certain that if there is no ag zones in this in the city limits of Placerville, we still have to have an employee housing element, or,
Yes, that is
Program.
correct.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, I totally misunderstood that.
Small, for 6 or fewer.
I
will be
get that
considered-
part. I
yes.
just, I heard what Wendy and Patty and Tricia heard was that if the ag zoning is not there, then we didn't have to supply
Right.
Housed,
employee housing. Let's get the ag thing out of it.
Yeah.
It had to do with agriculture zoning. We have one unit, one RE whatever, 21 acre parcel. We have that one parcel. I think Wendy's motion was that if that parcel was rezoned, would we still, and correct me if I'm wrong,
No,
Wendy.
that's right.
If that parcel was rezoned, would we still have to supply employee housing even of 6 or fewer? And you're saying yes, where earlier I thought you said no.
Right.
Yes, for 6 or fewer. You would only eliminate the large
It would-
employee housing.
And
Because
the
that's the
large-
only place that you could put a
'Cause
large
there's
one,
that-
that's why.
We
Is
only
on that
have, the
ag-
Is
city
on that
only
one.
has one zone district that qualifies as an agricultural zone, as I read earlier, because it allows for all these agricultural uses. It's an agricultural zone.
Okay.
So the employee housing really is more than just agriculture. It's just employee housing. It really, I mean, that was kind of my comment earlier. It has really nothing to do with agriculture employees.
It's for agricultural, it's for farm labor housing. It
Except
only
we
applies
can't
to
make-
farm labor housing.
I think the point is, if you want to have 6 beds and do whatever you want with it, agriculture, drug and alcohol rehab, friends, we don't have control of that. So
Correct.
to stop it, I mean, I understood that part.
That's what
So
I
I think that to rezone, so we don't have to have the large, maybe, I mean, do you not want to look at that? Because we can't control the 6 anyway, no matter what they
I
want to do.
don't think that there's any place we can, right now, put 36 units.
Well, it would have to be only on that RE zone.
No, I don't think
Is
so.
that
The
correct?
the large employee
Yeah.
housing could only be built on that RE zone parcel.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I
And
stand
so,
corrected.
if you wish to have it rezoned, staff can certainly bring back a notice, a resolution of intent to amend the zoning map to change the zoning on that parcel. Actually, I think there's two, reading here in the staff report. It basically says the city has one parcel containing approximately 21 acres and less than 1 acre of another parcel that are zoned RE. So there's probably a little piece that's zoned RE on another parcel by the reading of this.
Okay.
Which isn't big enough. Yes, sir.
Mayor, can I suggest, I think there are still some questions that council has on this. I would still recommend that maybe the city attorney and I were talking, we can research a couple of things on this and maybe bring this back. You want to wait 2 meetings? So maybe October 14th meeting?
So I will amend my
Continue
motion
to that date.
to continue it to October 14th. All right, thank you.
Okay, so, and the motion, this second, agree?
Yes.
Okay.
Phew.
So we do have a motion. We will continue this until October 14th for 9.1. Call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. No opposed, so therefore it moves, 9.1 moves. 9.2, Mr. Rivas.
Single-room occupancy units. This program requires the zoning code to be amended to include a definition and development and regulatory standards for single-room occupancy units, or SROs. According to the California Department of Community Development, SRO units and their facilities provide a housing option for special needs groups such as lower-income individuals, persons with disabilities, the elderly, or former homeless who find housing in traditional apartments and single-family residences unaffordable and unsuitable. This program, when implemented, would assist the city in meeting its housing element goals and policies as contained within the housing element. The proposed amendments would establish development standards and processing regulations for SRO facilities uses to ensure that minimum living accommodation standards for dining, sleeping, storage, living, accessory use areas, and management requirements for SRO facilities are provided and maintained, as there are no state standards specifically for an SRO unit or facility. The ordinance would also add under parking and loading of the zoning ordinance, parking on-site requirements of an SRO facility at a ratio of 1 stall per 4 single-room occupancy units. This ratio is similar to others required by cities and counties in California. An SRO facility would be similar to a multi-family apartment complex or building use in that it would accommodate multiple families in one facility. The draft ordinance would add the SRO facility use to the list of permitted uses within each of the multi-family zone districts and site plan review. These districts are the R2, R3, R4, and R5 multifamily zone districts. They provide for the development of duplexes and multifamily residential uses at densities between 8 and 20 units per acre. The ordinance would also add the SRO facility to a list of conditional uses authorized with a conditional use permit and site plan review within the central business district and commercial zones, the CBD and C zones, that are located within the city's Main Street and Placerville Drive corridors in close proximity to employment, services, retail, and transit. The CBD and C zones permit commercial uses, but also include multifamily residential uses located above or below ground level. The Planning Commission considered these amendments at their meeting on May 6th of 2014, and they recommended that the City Council approve the changes as recommended by staff. So with that, staff is recommending that the council introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance entitled An Ordinance Amending Provisions of Title 10 Zoning Ordinance of the Placerville City Code to allow for single-room occupancy units and facilities. That concludes staff's report. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, I'm going to start at this end. Tricia, none. Carol? None.
I do.
Go ahead.
All right. So Pierre, under management, do we have any kind of discretion over management of the SROs? We say that an SRO facility with 25 or more units shall provide on-site management. I mean, can we stipulate, 24/7, or do we have any discretion over that? And I'm thinking of, some of the single-room occupancy unit that we have in the city of Placerville that has had some challenges with that.
You talking about the Curry House?
Right, we do
Well,
have
that is
one.
a single-room occupancy.
Oh, no, I'm not
Okay.
talking about Ridgeview Manor, yeah.
Ridgeview
Okay, I know.
Manor.
So there's more than one.
Well, that's true,
So there's-
forgive me,
There's several.
that's true.
Yeah, by reading what's proposed in the ordinance under facility management, an SRO facility with 25 or more units shall provide on-site management. An SRO facility with less than 25 units shall provide a management office on-site. And so we certainly can amend that.
So we have the discretion to mandate that it's a 24/7 management?
Yes, I believe we do.
Okay, because I think that would be wise. And under number 2, under management, that a management plan shall be submitted with the conditional use permit and the site plan review, talking about, the building maintenance. I mean, what are our standards for that? Because I know we've had some challenges with maintenance in the past on some of our sites.
A lot of challenges.
A lot of challenges. What kind of discretion do we have over that?
They would have to meet, typical health and safety code, building code regulations.
Ongoing?
Fire safety,
Okay,
just as any other building currently does,
okay.
including our existing SRO.
I was
Okay.
just going to ask if we could impose more.
Okay. All right, those are my questions for now. Okay. Actually, one more, sorry. Can we limit the amount of SROs in each zone? So we don't have a proliferation of any one area of our city?
I believe we can.
Yeah. Because I would certainly be wanting that.
I was just thinking about a hotel, like the Carey House. So
Well, that's true.
you sort of want those in close
You want- yeah,
proximity to one
yeah.
another.
That's true.
But maybe in in this,
Residential
in
area.
the residential sections, you really wouldn't want the.
Just in the
density-
residential
The
neighborhoods.
density of them, but I don't know how you would write that. Maybe this you should come back.
Isn't there,
I think we,
the way I read this, Pierre, isn't there there minimum zoning here? In other words, if the zoning is R1, R1A, or R2, a duplex, you can't put 25 SROs in an R2, can you?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that question.
I'm sorry, can you put 25 units in an R2 duplex zoned area?
These would be subject to the density requirements of the multifamily, so it couldn't go beyond what was allowed in the multifamily
Okay.
zone.
So there's only going to be a few places a 25 and above can go. For SROs, it's going to require the management.
Okay.
I'm not sure, were you
So it looks like the
referring to
way it's
only the
proposed here in the
25s?
code, in the multifamily residential zones, it would be a use permitted by right, but the discretion would be in the commercial zones. The central business district and the commercial zones would allow single room occupancy facilities, but only when they're above or below ground level under a conditional use permit. Whereas in the multifamily zones, they're permitted as a matter of right. Subject, of course, to the standards that we've placed in the development standards proposed in the code.
Kira, I have a question, and going back, I'm going back to our meeting, our last meeting, and we had all that controversy about the 12 beds versus the 6 beds et cetera, et cetera. And this is, that what's being presented to us tonight is very confusing to me, because I'm wondering if somebody wanted to do like a 12-bed facility like that, would they qualify under this new housing rule?
No.
How do you differentiate? Because what concerns me is that Pierre said we have no control over the 6 beds, you know, for the workers, for the, you know, the ag workers or whatever. Employee housing, thank you. And so I'm confused, how, if we have no way to, you know, say that this is, you know, what are you gonna use it for, or this is all we're gonna allow, and then, I don't know, I'm confused, I really am, I
think
I
SRO
think
is
people could-
basically low-income housing, and it's very clear what it is. It's for housing for one individual in one room.
but
And
they're talking about more.
up to 2, sorry. Up to 2 in one room,
Like a boarding house.
like a boarding house.
And, you know, and maybe we're presenting scenarios like so often happens, it's never going to occur. That in this day and age where it seems like people specialize in finding a way to usurp rules and regulations, that we have to look ahead and kind of, you know, wonder if what, you know, could this happen? And I don't know, I don't want to be a, you know, I understand the need for everything that we've talked about, but I just feel as though there's somebody waiting to pounce on this that we didn't count on.
Pierre, can I ask a question? Or, Mr. Mayor, can I? But as I read this, it only applies to the multifamily zones, the central business district, and the highway commercial. Is that accurate, Pierre?
When referring to the commercial zones, it's CBD, the Central Business Zone District, and the C, the Commercial Zone District.
So it really doesn't apply to the R1 6000 and the regular subdivisions and homes?
That's correct. The
Except where there's
SRO is in
multifamily designations?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So that might help to kind of alleviate a little bit of the anxiety? So it's only where apartment complexes basically are zoned right now?
That's right.
And I happen to live on Apartment Hill.
Well, that's true.
And I'm going to tell you, as the chief can tell you and share with you, the amount of calls we've had up there in the last 2 or 3 months, I mean, our population is changing. And it's scary. And it's all, you know, when you're condensing all, and I guess
urban
maybe
densities.
It's just, it's really bad. And so that's my concerns, and that's why I'm saying projecting, because I am a witness to see what's happened because of some of this, and it's allowed. And so I don't know.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's for Pierre, but I think the chief might be able to answer it better. Out of curiosity, do you know if Ridgeview Manor is fewer or more than 25?
Pierre may be able to answer that better. Do you know how many Ridgeview Manor is?
I don't.
Gosh, it doesn't seem like it's 25, but I'd have to double check.
So then really,
So the answer is we don't know. You'll have to go by and count them yourself.
So, well, so
Probably
what's your
just-
question?
Well, because I'm just wondering what standards they would be held to.
they wouldn't need a management plan.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
if they're out of compliance now, or if we
The
do this,
senior
would we be
citizen-
able to control them more?
The Senior Citizen Center on Clay Street would have to have a management plan, because they're over 25 units.
Do they?
I think so. They're the
This
only ones that
code
were
would not
R5.
be retroactive.
they
It
do.
wouldn't
It's
be
not
applied to
retroactive, so
Ridgeview
that
Manor.
answers your
Oh.
questions. Okay.
It's only for
That's an
new.
existing use. This
So if
would
they
apply
were
to
to
new
sell it.
facilities.
If they were to apply for a change, they're different.
So to Tricia's point, does the state set this with the 25 or more units? Is that coming from the state, or is that us? requiring management, the trigger number.
No, that's our number.
That's our number.
We researched other jurisdictions and we came up with that.
So we
with
could
those.
make it 20 or?
Yes.
Or none.
We didn't want to be too onerous, and so
Don't want to
we
be too
tried.
onerous, but we want to protect our city too.
Correct.
So we could make that a
Yeah,
little
if
less.
you want to make it a little more restrictive, you have that option.
Okay.
That was something that we pulled from other agencies, other
Other
jurisdictions.
cities that are similar
Other
in size
cities.
to us or larger?
Similar size.
Similar size,
We
okay.
looked at other cities, a number of them.
All right, thank you. Well, good question, Tricia.
Okay, I'll open it to the public at this time. Item 9.2, any comments, questions? Okay, seeing nobody coming to the podium, I'll bring it back to the council. Do we have a recommendation to follow staff's recommendation, or we want to make some changes to this? Looking for an adoption.
If you put it in motion, what you were just talking about.
Okay.
I have a question of Pierre, then quickly. At the Planning Commission meeting, did they adopt or change some of these recommendations? So did the Planning Commission review this, or do you recall?
I don't believe so. I believe it was,
Suggestions?
I'm trying to remember which one it is that they did have there.
The next
Oh,
one,
oh,
okay.
that's what I'm.
the
confused.
commission recommended unanimously that the city council approve the proposed ordinance as revised by the commission. So it looks like the commission probably did amend something in the code, but I can't recall what it is.
Okay.
Okay. Now,
Have a motion?
yeah, I'm going to make a motion. Actually, one more quick question, though. With the 25 or more units, and we can have 2 people per unit, so you could have 50 people if you have 2 people per unit. Is that correct, Pierre?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, then I'd like to make a motion that we introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance entitled An Ordinance Amending Provisions of Title 10, the zoning ordinance, with the change in item F1, that we take it from that 25 or more units require on-site management down to 15 or more units, which would mean,
I'll second that.
Would you also then correct the second plan that an SRO facility with less than 15 units shall provide a management
office on-site, forgive me.
Yes.
Yes, I amend the motion to also include the 15 or units or less.
I had a question about, were you going to ask for 24/7
I
on-site
think the management plan is what you're really looking at here, and if the management plan is such, depending on the type of occupancy, if it's the carry house, it has on-site management 24/7. If it's a boarding house, it may not need it if it's got office stuff off-site. If it's got somebody there and an office, a manager on site, like the senior apartments down on Tunnel Street, for instance, there is a on-site manager, but there is off-site offices, and that person that lives there and has some responsibilities, but is not necessarily available 24/7. They have regular office hours, and then there's an emergency process, I guess, if they need to call out. So,
I think the
Well, it-
idea is you want more oversight. I mean, you want to be sure that there's more oversight, right?
well, if you're down to 15.
Do you
there
want a
is.
24-hour person who's on patrol?
No, not patrol,
No.
but that lives there.
Just available?
On-site.
With
Available.
office hours? That's what I'm
On-site.
kind of thinking.
Right, and on-site management
to
could
me.
suggest that, as opposed to a management office on-site. So
Right,
on-site
that's
management.
exactly That's
Yeah.
exactly how I read it.
Right,
Yeah.
That
so,
one is
so,
24/7 and the other one is business hours.
Yeah.
Or
which,
office hours.
which would be fine as written. Right, so we don't need to amend that part of the,
Well, I think also remember that they were asking somewhere in here that there be an actual management plan that has to be.
That's right above.
that's item 2.
Has to
Yeah,
be
F-
put into the conditional use permit.
That's in here.
So in the plan, that could be addressed 24/7.
All Right, so do I have a second with that change from
Yes.
25 to 15 on the first sentence?
Yes.
Tricia did.
Okay, and there is not, so that's just the, okay. All in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, 9.2 is passed, and move on to 9.3. My jacket. Pierre, we are at, I'm sorry, I know we're moving on to the next item, 9.3, and I know you've got 4 in a row here, so once you've finished your notes on that, you can move on to 9.3. If you need a
Okay,
break, let me know.
Okay, 9.3, that is traditional and supportive housing. Recent changes in state housing law, state housing element law, that's SB 745, went into effect January 1st of this year. This bill amended a section of the government code and the state's housing element law to replace health and safety code definitions of supportive housing and traditional housing. The city utilized these health and safety code definitions for defining traditional and supportive housing. Staff needed time to incorporate these changes, so the ordinance already met those requirements, which is fortunate. The city's adopted state and certified housing element contains the implementation programs, a part of the strategy to reduce potential constraints to the maintenance, development, and improvement of housing within the element's 8-year planning period. This program requires a zoning code to be amended to comply with California housing law to permit transitional and supportive housing as residential uses within the Placerville's mixed-use zones. These zones include business professional, central business district, commercial, convenience commercial, and highway commercial. Under state law, traditional housing and supportive housing are permitted as a residential use and only subject to those restrictions that apply to other residential dwellings in the same type in the same zone as they are permitted. The city partially complies with state law currently. Transitional and supportive housing, that is called a residential service facility or subcategory of a community care facility under the zoning ordinance, is permitted in all of the city's residential zones, such as R1A, RE, R120, R110, and R16. As a result of the zone change and new definitions for transitional and supportive housing as adopted by the city in 2013. The new state definitions for transitional and supportive housing and for term target population used in definition of supportive housing are provided in the staff report. The staff is recommending that the City Council approve the definition change to transitional housing. There is no change necessary to the zoning ordinance definition of supportive housing because it matches the new 2014 government code definitions. So staff, as part of its request, is asking that we add the government code definition of target population for context. No changes are proposed for definition of a community care facility within the zoning ordinance. Transitional supportive housing uses remain categorized under the residential service facility use definition, a subcategory of the term community care facility. To implement the requirement of Program 8, which is in the housing element, the ordinance would add the residential service facility as a permitted use within each of the city's mixed-use zones, subject only to those restrictions imposed upon other residential uses within the same zone. Program 8, when implemented, would assist the city in meeting the housing goal, element goal B in policy 1 of goal B, which requires the city to allow transitional housing and supportive housing in appropriate zoning districts to be consistent with California housing law. The Planning Commission did consider these changes at their May 20th meeting, and they recommended that the City Council adopt it as proposed by staff. So with that, staff is recommending that the council introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending the provisions of Title 10, zoning ordinance of the Placerville City Code to allow for supportive and transitional housing within the city's mixed-use zone districts that permit residential uses. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you. Questions? Questions? Questions on this side? Seeing none, it sounds to me like we have some cleanup in our language. Other than that, that's my description, maybe incorrect.
Very simple.
Any comments from the public? Any questions, concerns? Okay, going once, going twice.
Too
Yes.
bad. So this doesn't change our 6 to 10 beds problem that we had the other day?
No. No.
So
Correct.
this doesn't allow anybody to come in and say, okay, I want to do 10 beds here, and we would still have the same rights that we have now, correct?
It's the
Our
same.
attorney is shaking his head yes.
Okay.
That is correct. Anybody else? Okay, close public comments. Bring it back to the council for action.
I'll move that we introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance entitled, "An Ordinance Amending Provisions of Title 10,"
Second.
et cetera.
Moved and second that we move on with item 9.3 as recommended. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And it's unanimous. Item 9.4, again, Mr. Abbas. Timeout. We're going to take a 5-minute break.
All right.
Is that adequate? Sorry, yeah.
What's that?
What's your name? Alan. Yes. What's your last name? John. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay.
Steve, you? No. It's just gonna be, update on the, our quarter end June 30th. We're actually, we should have. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'm not, we haven't prepared for that. Steve Yule is really not, he doesn't direct, he's more of the operation. So,
Yeah, and I think
well, right now, you have your interim city engineer, which is Larry there's, yeah, probably the best thing, Sue, is to give us some time. Right. Good. Yeah, give us. That's my question. Well, like we talked about before, there's a number of projects that would be going. Elementary, like for example, the project in your place, project, there's a good chance that'll start like mid-May. So, Main Street utilities, I think the goal is to start. It's a 2-year process, so this spring, summer, the utilities. Actually, that one, you know what, that one actually, I take that back. I think they were gonna try to do utilities. But a lot of it's still, really, yeah, it's probably still in the early phase, and also last week, probably some Facebook. It was, probably against pouring, so it's figure out where depth is. It's still preliminary on that, but, so, you know, we'll talk about it at the next meeting.
Well, you know what, you need to get Scotty to sleep.
Yeah.
No, earplugs.
Earplug.
We'll see the movie.
Primarily talk about.
Yeah.
Should have. What he looks like.
Yeah, because one of the reasons we thought it'd be better to postpone it, so we could get the rest of the financial stuff.
Yeah, well, we originally scheduled.
You know, when I really saw him is when he had, and he was so sick, remember?
So you guys can see what the second order would come. And, because I looked at the fourth quarter is gonna be really tight. There's a lot of projects in the hopper. There's a lot of projects, so.
Well, either that or two.
I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been surveys out. There's been ongoing surveying, testing. Yeah, Cameron. They just, matter of fact, last Friday. It was either last Friday or Friday before we actually Johnson Cameron downtown. So. Yeah, right. We had to reschedule the meeting.
Yeah, I wrote down those, I think that's a really good question. Do we have the ability to verify? What if they're all working for Helen until? It's supposed to be fun.
There you go. So, yeah, Pleasant. Oh, man. Yeah. Just because I'm jealous. I was trying to find out the election results.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I was about to say, orange.
Yeah. That's gonna be interesting.
Somebody could come in and oppose it and sue us.
George Floyd.
next door and we'll see what they got.
Come back, I mean, those are all good questions. I mean, that's the question I'd like to answer myself.
Was it a dark green or a light green?
Some other business. I mean, everybody's employed somewhere. Has that been employee
Took all
housing?
the light.
No, it's supposed to be for
Nice
farming.
little garden house. It's amazing. Cave. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. There you go. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, one year we did, my oldest son was an Angels, or is an Angels fan. So we did his room blue, it was blue, red, no white, tan, there was some tan on it. But anyway, man, that was a lot of work. We've got wainscoting, trim, you know, it's just like, when is this gonna end? All the cutting in. Beige is a good color.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd please come back to order. Okay, at this time, we're going to move on to item 9.4. Mr. Rivas again, unfortunately.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This request would modify two sections of the city's zoning code to assist in partial implementation of program number 3 within the city's housing element, and that's high density development unmet need of the 2013-2021 housing element cycle 5, and for consistency with state law. These text amendments would change section 1049, which is the site plan review section, and section 10512, which is the R5 multifamily residential zone district. The site plan review section would be amended in two ways. First, the amendment would clarify under which zone districts the site plan review process would be required. And second, it would exempt from site plan review process multifamily residential structures within the R5 zone, only the R5 zone. And just for clarification as well, the R5 zone is not applied to any land currently within the city of Placerville. It's only a text zone. Text amendments to the R5 zone would involve two components. First, it would eliminate references to single-family residential uses as a permitted or conditional use, as the purpose and intent of the R5 zone is to provide for high-density multifamily housing. Second, the amendments would establish a minimum and maximum density within the R5 zone at 20 dwelling units per acre, with density achieved to be determined by the city when considering site constraints such as slope, roadways, etc. And I want to just talk just a little bit about that. So instead of just making a blanket gross calculation of 20 times whatever the acreage is of the property, say if you have a 10-acre piece of property and 5 acres of it is 30% slope and wetlands and different other constraints, we would only apply the 20 units per acre then to the portion of the property that can be developed, and we would exclude those areas that we would consider not developable. That way somebody's not being penalized when they could have maybe a significant portion of the property that can't be developed for different constraints. During the city's 2013-2021 housing element update, the city received comments from the Department of Housing and Community Development on the draft housing element, and they noticed that the R5 zone with its 20 dwelling units per acre density is appropriate from a density perspective for lower income households per the government code, and that it be amended so that the allowed density is at least providing for a minimum of 20 dwelling units per acre. Existing R5 density per city code is set as a maximum of 20 units per acre. So now it would be a minimum and a maximum. Can't build less, can't build more. HCD further noted that in accordance with government code, the city may not require a conditional use permit, planned unit development permit, or other discretionary local government review that would constitute a project under the California Environmental Quality Act. The existing R5 zone lists multifamily housing units as a permitted use. However, Section 1049 of the Site Plan Review section of the City Code requires that all multifamily structures receive site plan review approval before a construction permit may be issued. The site plan review process is a discretionary review before the Planning Commission, which constitutes a project under CEQA. Program 3 of the housing element includes additional actions required by the city, but additional actions are not components of this text amendment. These actions are amendments to the city's Placerville's zoning map, changing the zoning designation for parcels within the city to the R5 designation or zone district. And those are, when the city adopted our current housing element, contained within that housing element were 10 sites that are proposed to be rezoned to the R5 at a future date. This is only, again, text amendments, nothing to the map. The Planning Commission considered the changes to the R5 zone district at their meeting on August 19th of 2014 and recommended that the council approve these changes. So with that, staff is recommending that the council introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance entitled, if I can find it, the City of Placerville Amendments to Title 10 Zoning of the Municipal Code to clarify the zone district subject to site plan review for the construction of multifamily residential structures and to establish the density of the R5 multifamily residential zone consistent with requirements under state housing law and the City of Placerville housing element, and to remove single-family residential uses from permitted and conditional uses within the R5 zone. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Okay, any questions of staff? I'm gonna start with Carol this time.
I have one question, and it's the whole minimum, maximum thing. Do we have any other zoning that has that language in there?
We do not. All of our other multifamily zone districts basically have a maximum, so you can't exceed that amount.
And it's just not an option in this R5 zoning? Is that a state mandate?
It's a state statute that requires that we provide for a 20-acre minimum district. What we did, though, however, if you look on page 2 at the bottom there, basically we stated, and this is in our housing element, and so our housing element was certified by the state, density achieved shall be determined by the city based on site-specific environmental constraints such as slope, water courses, road rights-of-way, or other easements, etc., and the R5 development regulations of yards, building heights, etc., consistent with the housing element general plan as amended. So in other words, the city wouldn't calculate a gross calculation. In other words, just taking the acreage times 20, and that's the minimum that would be required to be built on the property. Instead, we would do a net, so we would subtract portions of the property that would be deemed not developable.
Yeah. Well, so let's say you have a piece of property that is zoned R5, and there's one section on there that's buildable, or there's more than one section that's buildable, but only one you could put a 20 dwelling unit complex on there. Could you build other things on that same parcel, or are you only limited to a 20 unit per acre building? Does that make sense?
Yes, this zone district is limited to multifamily, to apartments.
But, okay, so let's say, I'm just going to say, let's say you could build a 20 unit per acre complex here, But over here, you have room for a duplex or some other multifamily use. Is that possible, or can you only do 20 units per acre in an R5 zone?
It would have to be demonstrated that that would be the maximum they could build. If the property is constrained, then they can build something less.
So if
I'll leave
it's
it- I'll
2.1
leave it at
acres,
that.
it could be 20, 40 plus 1/10 of 20. In other words, additional 2. So you could have 42 units. If that percentage was worked out. Is that correct?
I would say that's correct.
Okay.
I didn't understand what you said
That's
at all.
math, I know.
Yeah.
I think the best way to characterize it again is if you had a 10-acre parcel and half of it could not be developed, then we would be calculating the 20 units per acre on the 5 acres, not the 5 that couldn't be developed. In a very simple terms.
So you still have to use the 20 units per acre on the buildable part of the land.
That's correct.
You don't have an option to build something less.
You do not have an option to build something less.
So how does that not become a taking? I mean, I don't know. If that's the only thing you can build, maybe that's a question for the attorney, but it just seems like we are now dictating that this is the only thing you can build on this piece of property.
Then it's not a taking, because to constitute a taking, you have to remove all economic development potential of the site.
Oh,
And this doesn't do that.
because it allows for this particular type of
Allows
density
for
housing.
this very
or
restrictive
building.
use. And again, we're trying to be sympathetic to the situation where somebody, because of where we are in Placerville, we have constraints, we have topography, we have, different limitations, and so we want to make sure, and like I said, it's in the housing elements reviewed by the state, so we have this caveat that it's not going to be a gross calculation, it'll be a net calculation. But essentially, that's what the state requires us to do. We were required to create a multifamily zone district allowing 20 units per acre minimum, not maximum. It's in the state statute. It's not something that we have a lot of flexibility on, other than this caveat.
Okay.
That was kind of my question, but I'm still kind of unclear. So say you have 5 acres, and 1 acre you could maybe build a duplex on. Do you need to build 80 units before you can build the duplex on the 1 acre that has a slope so that it averages out? Or could you have this R5, develop this because you can afford to do that on this 1 acre and build a duplex and rent it out and continue with your R5 compliance? Can you do that, or do you need to
Yeah,
80 units first?
I guess the only way I can characterize it is, because I'm not exactly sure what your question is. I think I understand it, but let's put it this way. Again, I'll use my 10-acre example. We'll start subtracting out the acreage that can't be developed. And then we're going to multiply 20 units times the remaining acreage. That is going to be the minimum number of units somebody will have to build on the property. They can build multi-units on what's left, as long as the total is 20 units per acre for that can be developed.
So
not
they would
less.
have to do that first. They would have to develop the 20.
You have to submit a development
They'd
plan.
have to, well, yeah, so you can't just say, I have this much, this is undeveloped, you can't develop this, which you can, but not at this level. And you can't just choose to only focus on that portion and never do the other part? You know what I'm saying?
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is that particular
that was
area
your
can
question.
be developed, and they want to develop it with a unit that's less than 20 units per acre. No, that wouldn't comply with the zoning.
Even if they're developing on the part that you deem undevelopable?
Well, then they're going to have to provide for a minimum of 20 units per acre of that we deem that can be developed. It's a simple calculation. If they build
Yeah, but I think we're making more out of this. I think that that's the zoning. They bring a plan to us, and the plan would have to include those minimums and those maximums. okay? And then they would have to fight. Usually, we're fighting for the other way around. I want to get 17 units here and it's only zoned for 10. Well, they could possibly split the land and then have 2 5-acre R5 properties. They could develop one and then come back in 6 years and develop the other, but they can't just pick and choose and just say, oh, I just want to build a small part of this, of the 10. There's a minimum plan. You bring a plan to the county, to the city, and it's approved or disapproved based upon the regulations.
Well, maybe this would help. Let me go ahead and phrase it this way. What you're looking at is a developer that's going to probably build small units to make them more affordable, to achieve 20 units per acre. I don't think they're going to be large luxury apartments. Well, why don't we put it that way?
Questions?
I do have one question, Pierre. Sorry, I do have one question, Pierre. Are we mandated by the state to remove the single-family residential uses from the permitted and conditional uses within the R5 zone, or is that coming from us?
No, we are required to do that.
Okay, that is
It
a
is
state
restricted.
mandate.
Yes, it's a state mandate.
Okay, all right, 'cause
Remember, this is only for the R5. We still have all of
Right.
our other multifamily zones that are unaffected, but this is the one new zone district that we're, basically creating to be compliant with the statute.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, I'll open up to the public for questions, comments.
Okay, last time you're going to hear from me today. Without an inventory of the current housing that we already have in this city that meets the high density definitions, how can we show the state that we already meet their requirements? I've said this several times. We really do need an inventory of how many
We have that.
housing units we have. We do have an inventory now that we know how many actually meet this high density?
Well, it's not quite that simple, but the housing element basically states these are how many you're assigned of the future growth
Right.
in the state. And that is the number we have to meet. They don't take into consideration what you already have anywhere in the state. We're no different than anywhere else in the state of California. They don't count the empty houses. They don't count resales. They count new property available to be developed. It doesn't mean we have to build it. It means we have to have a plan that shows we have this much land available in these properties. That's called our housing element. And our housing element
Okay,
is
yeah.
now current when we once we finish implementing these changes.
Okay. But as I understand it, at some point in time, we're going to have to actually zone for this high-density housing.
I believe that is correct, right, Pierre? We have currently 7 or 8 parcels that fit the definition.
The housing element identifies 10 possible sites to be rezoned to R5. And to answer the speaker's question, current inventory has no bearing on this requirement. No bearing at all.
Okay. So 10 sites for high density without a site plan. It says exceptions. The following shall not be subject to a site plan review. And yet we had down under the minimum and maximum density, we have density shall be determined by the city based on site-specific environmental constraints, and a list there. It sounds to me like that's pretty much a site plan. If you're gonna
Okay.
look at the environmental constraints, slope, water courses, road rights of way, easements, setbacks, building height, et cetera, does not that constitute pretty much a site plan?
I'll let the attorney answer that, but I think it's basically
I can answer that, Mr. Mayor, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah, basically what the state is telling us is we cannot apply discretion to the application, so it wouldn't be subject to a public hearing where the city can deny the application. So what that means is there is a site plan review in some respect, and that is when somebody comes in to pull their building permit, they're submitting building plans, they're submitting a site plan, and they'll be subject to all development standards as any other development would: parking, setbacks, height limitations, the like. Those kinds of things are subject to. But that's still ministerial review. That's not discretionary.
And so the following shall not be subject to site plan review refers to what? Review by the Planning Commission? Because under section 1 it says exceptions. The following shall not be subject to site plan review: multifamily structures within the R5 zone. So that, to me, that's a little confusing. Okay, we've got down here under minimum density, the requirements are basically what I would consider to be the essentials of a site plan, and yet it says no site plan review. So apparently there's going to be a site plan, but it doesn't get reviewed other than administratively, can't be denied.
Well, you didn't say that. It's got to be reviewed by, but I'll let the city attorney answer that.
Site plan review is a word of art in terms of our code provides for site plan reviews for certain projects. So if an affordable housing project in the R5 comes before the city, there will not be a formal site plan review before the Planning Commission, because that would be a discretionary approval, and that would not apply. Okay. What I think Pierre indicated is they would be subject to all of the building regulations, standards that would be in place that are already in place, whether that be something having to do with drainage, for example, reforestation. But the state has specifically said that there's to be no discretionary review of these types of projects. They're not even a project under CEQA, so there's no CEQA review of them as well.
Could we put in the language that says the following should not be subject to discretionary site plan review? Wouldn't that be a lot clearer then?
You know, I understood it to mean site plan review because it's in our ordinance, and our ordinances talk about that. So, I mean,
okay.
I don't know. It's kind of up to the council and here, however they want to do it.
It was not clear to me, so that's why I had the question.
And again, that's a word or a term of art that reflects site plan review in the code. I think that's what was meant by that, correct, Pierre?
That's correct, and it's staff's opinion that as it's, if you look on page 2, it's the changes to be made to the code are fairly simple. Under section 1049, site plan review, C, site plan review required. The Planning Commission shall review each. Okay, no, now it's not even on. No. I think we blew a fuse.
It doesn't go to them. They have nothing to say about it.
Oh.
No, they're back.
You submit the building plans, you submit a site plan. Staff is going to review it, height, setback, parking requirements. They have to comply with all those requirements. It's just non-discretionary, it's ministerial. It doesn't go to the Planning Commission at all. And that's what the code does. It removes it. R5 wouldn't be in the site plan review section.
Okay. Are there any additional questions from public? Again, this is, okay, go ahead.
Brady McGuire, 3607 Cedar Ravine. I've got just two major issues with this that really concern me. One is the minimum threshold of 20 dwelling units per acre. I don't think that's very achievable in this town anymore. If you talk to people who've been active in the development in this town, most of the flat lots have been built on. It's really hard to find a flat lot, and you really need a flat lot to achieve this kind of density. The other is the removal of the single-family residential. Over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of innovative planning designs, everything from cluster homes, patio homes, which would be considered detached, but may be more of a medium to higher density. I've seen just a multitude of designs. Many of them are award-winning. I feel like you're kind of handcuffing property owners into building low-income affordable housing. As a little research project before I came here, I went to look at the last apartment building that was built in this town. And that's the Cottonwood apartment project up on Clay Street. It sits on 6.5 acres. It has 81 units, which equates to 12.4 units per acre. If you were to look at that site and try to get 20 units per acre out of it, you wouldn't have a 3-story building, you'd have a 6-story building. It's just unachievable. I feel like you're taking 6 to 10 parcels in town and just putting a label on them, and it's going to restrict development. The other real significant issue I've run into just being in real estate development over the last umpteen years is since the financial meltdown of 2008, it's almost impossible to go out and get a multi-million-dollar development loan. They don't exist. The banks won't give them to you. So it seems to me that none of these projects are going to get built. The majority of these parcels are smaller, maybe 20 to 30 units. Most large, well-capitalized developers aren't going to want to mess around with these small projects. Certainly not in Placerville, where they've got to come in and do extensive hillside development, grading, expensive retaining walls, and then they're looking at expensive sewer and water fees on top of that as an operational cost. So my concern with the text amendments is I keep hearing Pierre say that, it requires apartments, but I don't see the word apartments in your zoning code text change. What I would like to see considered other medium to higher density mixed use developments that are achievable and able to be built, that have flexible designs, that can obtain financing. If I have a phased project right now where I can go build the units onesie twosie, I can get a small bank loan for, let's say, $200,000-300,000 to build each unit and not be at the mercy of a large bank or lender. I just think that these are things you need to be considering, because I don't see these projects getting built.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to submit my letter to the council for record.
Okay.
Evelyn Veerkamp, I have a much simpler, much less sophisticated input because I really don't understand what you're talking about. But I do know that there's a property up behind Rotary Park that's on 7 or 7.5 acres. I think I keep forgetting if it's Adams Way, Adams Road, or Adams something else, but let us be sufficient that it's Adams something. And I believe that property was meant to go before the Planning Commission a couple of weeks ago with the possibility of it going from R4 to R5. At the moment, it is a single-family residential. Two things, my own personal concern as well as the concern of a lot of people in the area who had hoped to go to that Planning Commission meeting, but it was postponed. Or not the meeting was postponed, but that particular part of the meeting was postponed. But we just are really anxious about the 7-acre property behind Rotary Park being, presumably 7 acres it will not be 7 acres times 20, but let us say for argument's sake, it's even 40 acres, 4 acres times 20 units. The thought of putting 80 residential units behind Rotary Park, which we all take ownership of in some way or another is very worrying in terms of what it will do to the neighborhood, what the infrastructure requirements could be. Now, I think we understand that the fact that we're talking about this tonight does not mean that tomorrow something's going to happen. This seems like it's, I don't know what is going to happen, but there is a huge neighborhood concern about what it would mean to develop that property in the way that this might allow for. I know that the family who are on that property, the single residential family who are on that property, had a question which they would have put to the Planning Commission, and that I don't know all the things that they would have put there. They would have been here tonight if they had understood that this was going to be on the agenda. But one of the questions that they were concerned about was, if they decided to sell that property, would they be allowed to sell it to somebody else like themselves who wanted to live there in a single residential unit? Or would it have to have this kind of zoning? And so let me just put that question to you on their behalf. Would they be able to sell to another property owner who only wanted to have this as single residential? Thank you.
Good evening, Michael Drobish, Placerville. And I do see this as a form of taking without compensation, and I'd like to see it challenged.
So are you talking based as a planning commissioner, or are you talking as an individual?
Michael Drobish, citizen.
Okay. All right.
Pretty much understand this, and I think, and I absolutely hate this, these state mandates being forced on us.
I know, we've been there.
And I would like to see, I know you have to basically adopt it. I'd like to see it adopted under protest and start sending resolutions to the state legislature to please give relief to these jurisdictions. The Sacramento's one-size-fit-all is not working. It's just a request if you could push back.
Yeah.
I do think staff has lessened the blow, if you will, of this. Especially I like the 20 dwelling unit per acre minimum and maximum. I'd like to see that stay. It meets the requirements and it keeps them
Well, the density,
at a lower level.
the density achieved determined by net is what you're talking about?
No, just the language. 20 dwelling units per acre minimum and maximum.
So you
because
think
the
we should leave
state
the
wants us
density
to
out?
be 20 units minimum with an open threshold. They could go anywhere else unless this language is adopted as it is.
Right, but they did adopt our language. That's
They
key.
approved it. That's great.
They approved our language about density achieved net is very key.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay.
Yep. I also agree with that. It was the section D1 where basically it will reduce the size of these structures as I see it. There'll be less density.
Right.
So I do commend staff for trying to, I don't think they like this either, but I think they've lessened the blow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Jennifer Nixon, resident. I just have a couple of questions, really. The zoning from the R4 to the R5, just a clarification that that's the only thing it could be used for once it's zoned that. Is that correct? And then another question is, how are these properties chosen? Rumor has it that there are 10 within the city limits that are,
It's not a rumor.
well, you know. And then, say if the neighborhoods are unhappy with it, what would be their protocol to try and get the city to look at possibly other properties other than what they're looking at right now? Okay, thank you.
My name is Larry Parker. It's been stated repeatedly here that the minimum of 20 units per acre is a state mandate, and I believe that's incorrect. Based on my reading today, I've read on the Department of Housing and Community Development website, and also I've read the state law that's referred to in this supporting material. And that's an alternative, that's a default. It talks about, for meeting this affordable housing, to do analysis of what's right for the community, what's affordable for the community, what's doable for the community, and or as an alternative to this analysis, choose this default figure of minimum 20 units per acre. And that's what has been chosen. But
It's
according to the reading on those two, the state law and the Housing and Community Development website,
I guess,
that's the choice there. It's not.
what state
it's not a
law are you
mandate.
referring to?
The one that they refer to here in support of that.
Okay, because that may be prior to the housing element being adopted by the state or during the process of adoption. So we went through that 7-8 months ago when we went through the housing element, and we brought forth all of these scenarios, and we had to meet certain things. We submitted to the state. They accepted our housing element, and now we, with these conditions that we, in the next 8 months, that we make these changes or adoptions to ours. Some of these adoptions are changes in state law that have taken place over the last year and are effective, that we need to change as far as just updating language, just like we do in our building codes. And some of these are things that were adopted with our housing element at the time. Even though the law says that, it still goes to the state housing development department, and then as part of the housing element, it's adopted. And I believe that's...
Okay, but the city chose one of the two alternatives, which was approved, but that wasn't a mandate. There was other alternatives.
So you're saying
that
that
could have been done.
10 months ago, we didn't choose the right option?
I'm saying it's not
Okay.
a mandate. It's been done over and over here.
Okay.
It's not a state mandate.
All right. At that, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the council. And we've got some questions to answer, Pierre and Mr. City Attorney. Either, which one of you guys like to start this?
I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. And I apologize, I did not take comments, but you did.
I mean, some of the
So-
speakers had questions regarding site-specific or actual rezones, and that's not what's before you this evening.
Okay.
And there were some questions regarding the text, which I think staff would be able to address. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I think Mr. McGuire had questions about the minimum of 20 acres per unit is unachievable. I think we've talked about it, and we answer that in the density, that paragraph that talks about density achieved will be determined by the city based on the site-specific environmental constraints such as slope, water courses, roads, rights-of-ways, and easements, etc. So that it's the net achievable at 20 units per acre, minimum or maximum. And then the removal of the single-family residential part, my understanding is there, and you'll answer that, is that feasible to remove that or not? And my understanding is that if we have a single-family home that's existing on the property, we're not changing existing property, as far as...
Yeah, we haven't, again, this is a text amendment, so let's just say for sake of discussion that a piece of property gets zoned R5 and it has an existing single-family use on it. That single-family use can continue. Property can be sold and bought and sold, and that single-family use doesn't go away.
Thank you. And so that was Ms. Veerkamp that asked that question. And then I think you've answered the taking without compensation. Mr. Drobish answered that question. Mr. City Attorney, taking without compensation.
Again, it revolves around whether or not there is a economically viable use of the property. In order for there to be taking, you have to deprive the property of all economic viable uses. And so arguably, if you zone a piece of property so that it requires something that can't be built on that property, that is potentially a taking. But if there is the ability to build what the property is zoned for, then there is no taking. It's a upzoning of the property, if you will.
Okay. And Mr. Parker asked about 20 units per acre state mandate.
Yes, Mr. Parker is correct that it is a default zone district, the 20 units per acre. And this is something that was discussed, I think, quite extensively when the council was considering the housing element update. And that we don't have the ability, we haven't had an apartment complex built in the city of Placerville, I think 15 years or more. So we don't have an ability to crunch numbers to somehow prove that you can build affordable housing at, say, 10 units per acre or some other alternative. But he is correct. There is that, at least there was that option to do that.
So there was that option back at the time we were applying for the housing element, but we would have had to prove we had only these sites available and we could generate the number of sites they wanted.
We would have to show economically based on land values, construction costs, that units can be provided and then rented out to meet low and very low income. And we just don't have that ability.
Right.
We don't have the ability to crunch those numbers.
And the other thing about the housing element, that is a number that the state assigns to every jurisdiction in the state of California. We're not alone. And the state divides it up based on projected growth from their economists and their population experts, the census data they have. It's not a mandate to build those houses. And in fact, during the prior housing element, we did not build any housing elements that met that need, which is not untypical. It was very typical of the situation for most of the communities in the state of California over that last cycle. The local regional government that comes up with the numbers for the local areas is SACOG. And SACOG worked extremely hard to try to get those numbers reduced. We got them reduced from what they were because we pushed on the area that there is existing housing that's vacant. There's existing housing that isn't being built because even though there's a growth in population, nobody can afford to build. There's no banks lending. There's no, all of these things that we've talked about. These things brought that number down that the state had projected, what they thought we would need, and they are adjusted every 4 to 8 years. And so the state doesn't do this annually, they do it every 4 years. But it's, the reality is, in my opinion, if you have concerns and complaints about that, is it needs to go to your local legislature. And the local legislatures that I'm aware of are very aware of this and have tried to bring down a realistic number. But for some reason, this particular state government doesn't believe that we do not need to address this issue. We need to address this issue. Developers need to address it. And we all need to address the fact that there needs to be housing for people who don't have the best jobs. People with low income and medium income and so forth. I'll give you an example. Go to El Dorado Hills. How much low income housing is there? There's, that I'm aware of, there's maybe 2 apartment complexes and some senior housing that would kind of qualify in that area. But is that correct? Is that the right? I don't know. But at some point, there's going to have to be more housing in that area that meets the definitions of low and moderate income housing. We can't just keep building houses for the McMansions at $1 million a piece or more. Some of us are getting older and are going to stop working. Some of us are going to stop being on the city council, and we're going to need housing somewhere. So some of us who are getting older are going to do that. So anyhow,
I have a couple questions.
okay,
for
now I'll
Pierre.
bring it back to the rest of the council for questions.
Pierre, one of the
comments that Jennifer brought up was that if it's rezoned R5, the only use that can be put on that is multifamily. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
And then also, will there be opportunities other than the 10 properties already identified to look at, or is that already basically fixed?
The city was required to do an analysis of potential sites that could conceivably be rezoned
Right.
to the R5 zone district. That was required. So we did an analysis of these sites. So these were determined to be, at least 10 suitable sites that could conceivably be rezoned to the R5 and can be built with a 20 unit per acre minimum. It's not to say that it's exclusive, that the city is prohibited from looking at a different site.
But there will be another public hearing process when that rezoning comes forward. Is that true?
That's correct.
And I have one other question, and I'm going back to what Mr. McGuire was talking about. There is a huge movement for small spaces, small living spaces, and it may or may not look like what we think of 20 units per acre could look like. And is there an opportunity where we might be able to leave in the permitted uses in an R5 zoning, whatever the developer thinks of, that could achieve the 20 units per acre? Why can't we do that?
Doesn't say they can't.
I mean, because I don't know what the future holds. I really don't, and I see a lot of things living small.
The tiny home movement.
Yeah, it's just, it's huge out there, and perhaps there is a way to meet the 20 units per acre that doesn't look like Cottonwood 5 stories high. So I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity there, and one other opportunity had to do with what Sue Rodman was talking about, which is the not be subject to site plan review. Perhaps we could reword that to say the following shall be subject to ministerial site plan review. So
Well, I think that's a given. Like I had stated earlier, when somebody comes in to develop the property, at the staff level, we're going to review the building plans, we're going to review their site plan, we're going to have to look at setbacks, landscaping, parking, lighting. All of that will be reviewed at staff level in a ministerial fashion. It won't be subject to a public hearing. It won't be discretionary.
Excuse me, may I interject? I think you can solve the problem, Pierre, by simply saying site plan review per, and then reference the code section for site plan review.
Well, the site plan review section that we have in our code is a discretionary action.
That's what I'm saying, and so you would just say shall not be subject to site plan review pursuant to the particular code section.
And I think that's what we did. If you look at page 2C up at the top, site plan review required. The planning commission shall review each application for a building permit in the following land use categories: all new construction of commercial structures, multifamily structures, including duplexes located within R2, R3, and R4. So that's the way it is now. It's site plan review, subject to review the planning commission for any structures in all those zones. And we put an exception: the following shall not be subject to site plan review: multifamily structures within the R5 zone. So we've excluded that from the site plan review that's articulated in our code. But it's not to say that staff isn't going to review it, because there's development standards in the zoning, in the zone district, height limits and setbacks and parking requirements.
it doesn't say that.
All that is done at the staff level. It's not, somebody just doesn't build something without the city reviewing it. It doesn't have to say that.
Okay. And maybe we can bring it up at the DS about tiny homes or alternatives to.
Yes.
Well, I guess to Carol's point, the language of multifamily structures, you're not dictating what that looks like, and that leaves room for creative designs in the future.
Absolutely. One thing I want to make clear too is we're not dictating that it has to be low income. So when a piece of property if it gets developed in the R5 zone and it's 20 units per acre, it can be for moderate income. But I think you're only going to achieve more affordable units is if you build smaller units. I think that's what it comes down to.
But you could do creative cluster patio homes if they're small and intimate and it works in the site. I mean, this is flexible.
Well, single-family detached, if that's what a patio home is, typically you're looking at 0 setback and that kind of thing.
What if they share a
Single-family
wall or
homes are
townhomes?
not permitted in the R5 zone.
Townhomes?
R5 zone is a multifamily zone. Townhomes are single-family attached,
Okay,
not allowed in the zone.
okay.
I have one other comment, and I guess is, so anybody that has multiple zone property or anybody has a large piece of property could come in and ask for R5 zoning too, correct?
That's correct.
So we may achieve this without forcing rezoning. I mean, there could be funding that comes up and available for people to develop low-income housing or affordable housing within the city on parcels that are actually multiple zones now and ask for R5 zoning. One other point that I'd like to bring out is that we're fortunate. The city of Lincoln requirement, their minimum is 30. They were forced to go to 30 acres, 30 units per acre. So it's a minimum of 4 stories high. So that's just, again, it's not, don't have to be built, but that you have to have the space available. Right. Their topography is different than ours. Any comments, questions of that? We have action by the council.
Well, I would like to go ahead and make a motion, but I would like to change the wording, and I would like to include, and I didn't get I'm uncomfortable making the change without Pierre's blessing, but I would like to see alternatives to strictly multifamily, like a single family, shared walls, or whatever alternatives we can come up with so that we encourage more than just a 4-story or 3-story high building. And I don't really know the wording for that, and I apologize, but if it can't be single-family dwelling units, I don't know what it, I just don't understand why you can't leave that language in there and leave it up to the developer to make it 20 acres per unit affordable. And maybe if you can help me with some wording, I would appreciate it, but if you can't, I'll...
Yeah, unfortunately I can't because the state is basically very restrictive. It's 20 units per acre multifamily. It's not single-family detached. That wouldn't meet the state requirements. So I can't recommend that.
Well then.
Well, I guess I'll make a motion that we, where was that? Where'd it go?
On the bottom of page 3 or the top of page 1?
Okay. An ordinance of the City of Placerville announcing findings and adopting amendments to Title 10 zoning of the municipal code to clarify the zone districts specified to site plan review for the construction of multifamily residential structures, and to establish the density of R5 multifamily residential zone consistent with requirements under state housing law and the City of Placerville housing element, and to remove single-family residential uses from permitted and conditional uses within the R5 zone.
I'll second that under protest.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
1 no. Carol hadn't voted no. Move on to item 11.1. Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As you know, for some time, there has been participated or discussion has taken place regarding, and work is in progress to construct or look at purchasing property and developing a new courthouse within El Dorado County. That decision was made quite some time ago. I provided some background on that in my report. And it's clear to me in the discussions that I've had that the decision to build a new courthouse was made by the state, and they are intent on doing that somewhere within El Dorado County. When that decision was made by the court, approximately in probably 2008, I think our focus became at that time, I was not here at that time, but our focus became trying to make sure that the courthouse that was constructed within our city limits. As all of us know, that would have an economic impact on our downtown when the foot traffic generated by the Main Street courthouse goes away. And we all knew that, and we all recognized that, and so we focused on making sure that that courthouse was at least built within the city of Placerville to try to capture some of that economic benefit that may come from having the courthouse still within our city limits. So the current progress is that the state administrative office of the courts is in the process of doing an EIR on property located up next to the jail. And they have selected that property. They've looked at it. They're working on the process and preparing the EIR at this time. We expect that the EIR will come out late this fall or early next spring. We're still waiting to hear the exact time. So that is in process right now. It is projected that the project would start in 2016-17 approximately and be completed in 2019 with a new courthouse opening at that time. With those projections and the progress that is being made, we felt at this time in discussions with the county staff that it would be advisable for us to begin to look at what would be feasible uses for the old Main Street courthouse so that we can hopefully be ahead of that game and make some progress on that so that when that does happen, we are prepared to go at that time rather than start once it closes and then take 5 years, if you will, to develop a plan and financing, et cetera. So we wanted to recommend to the council, and county staff took this same item to their board today at their board meeting, and they voted in favor of basically the same process that we are recommending to you here. And that process is that a blue ribbon committee be formed to begin looking at this process for potential uses for the Main Street courthouse. And then working with the county, work on committee structure, process, et cetera, and then bring that back to the city council and the board of supervisors. They will do the same to recommend that process to you and have that approved by you or amended. You will have input on that at that time also. And then the final thing that we are recommending here, that we begin to advertise and request people to talk to us if they are interested in serving on that blue ribbon committee. So that's the basics of this report right now, is to begin this process, and you know, you're not approving anything in terms of what the committee would look like tonight. We'll work with the county staff and bring back proposals for what we think might work and give that to you and have you approve that in the near future. So that's it for now, and if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
So I take this, we're looking for consensus, and this is something that was developed over the, I'm sure we didn't talk about this just yesterday, so over the years with our 2x2 meetings, with something we've been talking about for quite a while. Yeah. All right. What's the council's pleasure?
I have a question. Wasn't there already a blue ribbon committee?
That's the city hall.
Not that I'm aware of for the courthouse. There was for Old City Hall, but I don't believe so for the courthouse.
It might have just been talked out with PDA. I'm not positive what would be
I
the
think there's been a
potential.
lot of conversation, but I don't think anything official.
Nothing
Official
formal
committee.
yet, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yes.
Question for you, Pierre. Sorry, Cleve. Sorry.
Pierre's done.
Yeah, Pierre's done. It's been his show tonight. Would it make sense to us, before this blue ribbon committee is formed with this city and the county to set guidelines on, broad guidelines on what we want to accomplish with the use of the courthouse, like, needing to generate daytime and nighttime traffic, preserve and highlight the historical character, to look at that corner comprehensively, Old City Hall, the courthouse, the DA's office, because all of those properties, will be affected once the courthouse goes, as well as funding mechanisms, because I would hate for a citizens committee to spend an exorbitant amount of time and maybe fall short on, you can get a great idea that's not financially possible, or you have a fabulous use a couple of times a month, but then it sits dormant, throughout the day, which doesn't help revitalize and keep our downtown vibrant. I mean, would it make sense to set up those parameters?
Yeah, it would, and I think that that should be done. As part of forming the committee, we should give them those guidelines that we expect to see. I know there was some discussion on the two committee
Right.
about looking at things like that. So,
Okay.
so yes, that should be part of the process, not just, don't
Throwing
just
it
turn
out
them
there,
loose.
right.
Let's give them some guidelines and some direction on what we expect, so.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So I'd like to ask, because I am part of the 2x2, and I know we have had a lot of discussion, but what I'm not clear on, I don't think, is, number one, right now, the courthouse would revert back to the county, right? And so there's a lot of pending, right? So I'm wondering if, and I agree that we should start talking about it, but we don't really know what's going to happen. So if we talk about it, is it going to be members from the county as well as the city that would discuss? I mean, the blue ribbon is not going to just be Placerville people. However, that's who's going to be affected, is us, our little town.
Yes, you're correct. In all likelihood, the property will be given back to the county in some fashion. I will say a couple of times the county has proposed, well, let's just give it to the city.
Let's just
Then we don't
thanks,
have-
no.
But I'm not,
They don't
I've
want
made
it.
it clear, we don't want that to happen. This has to be a partnership with them, because it's
Exactly.
gonna be a big undertaking to
Exactly.
do something with that.
And
But-
you want
but
to
yes,
explain why, in other words, let's let the people know the condition of
Yeah,
the courthouse. Is
it's
it
in very poor condition.
very poor
It's
condition?
gonna take a lot of work to bring that up to a usable condition
Right.
for basically anything that you may want to do
Okay.
there, so.
Has there been any discussion with the state on using it for perhaps a different type of court system, a court use, instead of like be the all-encompassing court facility that it is today, but perhaps more of a satellite court, so it still maintains the functionality of a court? I mean, have we just kind of given up that it's not going to be a court facility? 'Cause
Based on the discussions and the meetings I've been in, that's been made pretty clear that they don't want anything to do with that building. I mean, for example, I've mentioned this in my report. As you know, back in 2002, I think is when it started, there was a legislative action taken that required all court facilities were turned over from the county to the state. And at that time, it was required that buildings be transferred also. So all physical structures, title to those were to be transferred to the state. Well, in our case, that didn't come down to where it was going to happen until about 2009, just because it took them a long time to get through that. And the state at that time sent a letter to the county and said, due to the condition of that facility and the fact that we are going to build a new facility in El Dorado County, we are declining to take possession of that facility. So they didn't even want it, due to a number of reasons. The condition of the facility is a major one, but also the amount of parking around the facility creates a big problem for them. And so they're basically saying, as my understanding, and what we've talked to them about this, is that they don't want the building.
Also, I think that they're considering the satellite, there'll be the one out in Cameron Park.
That's remaining.
That's going to stay, but it'll be a satellite facility, and they're not even considering this because of what Cleve just told you.
I guess I would love to know who the "they" is Like, is there names behind it? Who, I mean, really,
It's the state.
I
mean,
get that,
it's
I
the
get
coun-
that, but there's gotta be somebody. I mean, when the librarian came here, I don't know if you guys remember for the the sesquicentennial, he was fabulous. And when, when you get those kind of people that are so motivated for the history of our, of especially this community, the site of the gold rush, and if you got a few people like that in the state to help preserve this nugget that's in the central part of our town, I just don't understand who the they is that, you know, for 7 years, you're saying, since 2002 to 2009, they did no maintenance on that building at all. And now, and then when 2009 rolls around, they say, oh, well, golly, it's in such poor shape, we don't want it. Well, whose fault was that?
Carol, I tell you, the fights that went on, and we're stuck. I mean, was no negotiating.
Well, we're stuck, but it's going to be important for a committee and the county,
No, what I
county and the
meant
city
is
to make recommendations.
She's asking why there was no maintenance
No,
done. That's why.
Yeah,
because
but
they
in
knew
some
what was
ways,
going on.
it gets the state out of the ownership of that particular building, but it doesn't mean, from a
No.
historical perspective, they couldn't help fund restoration of the building.
Right.
Well, that's kind of
Because
what
it's
I
a
was
different
alluding
use.
to, yeah.
But when you, so, I mean, if we go back and say, you guys screwed this thing all up, let's fix it. Then it's fixed and used as possibly for who knows what, you know. But anyway, I think the questions are before us are, we want staff to proceed with, as recommended, and direct staff to proceed with in a different you know, I mean, how do we want to do it? The recommendations are that we form a committee, or start looking at forming a committee that would be blue ribbon in nature, that would mirror some of the same things the county's working on. And they would, in my opinion, they should be different people than are working on the construction or the state, the new facilities for the court. The AOC would not be involved. It would be local people that would be working at it and looking at potential possibilities along with funding sources.
There's just one other bone of contention I have, and no offense, Cleve, but when we speak about the courthouse, I would like it to be called the historic courthouse, not the old courthouse, and not even the Main Street courthouse. But I think really it deserves a designation and a title that bespeaks to the importance to our community. So throughout the document, whatever we decide, if we refer to it either, I mean, Main Street courthouse is okay, but I think the historic courthouse is really what it should be, personally.
Okay, any comments, questions?
How would we advertise to the community to solicit volunteers?
That's what staff and committee is going to bring back to recommendations.
Okay, so we're
and ideas.
directing this, but they'll decide what they're
Well,
going to do.
Well, then it'll come back to the council.
Excuse me. The advertisement part, similar to how we advertise volunteers, Susan Zito does that for us for other committees. And I believe we do it primarily in the newspaper, but our Facebook page, our website, et cetera, we will get that information.
And keep in mind that because our council, our committee, commission, and board terms are aligned with following council elections, we'll have 3 seats on every committee open up. That'll be their terms are ending March of 2015. So we're going to be starting this recruitment process soon for our existing committee, commissions, and boards. And depending upon how we coordinate it with the council, they may have their own process. In the county, my experience has been that they usually have a supervisor appointing a person. And we've never philosophically done that because we didn't want mirror images of the council. We wanted people to apply and you know, be interviewed by different council members or by the committee or the council at large, and all of you agree on, or at least a majority on, who should be appointed. So I see us at least following that same process to keep it in alignment with all of our other committees. And then we'll have to coordinate with how the county is, their time frame for doing it and how they're going to do it, and so that we can get this together. But Mr. Morris will be discussing that with the CAO probably and figuring out how that's going to operate. But I think we would probably proceed the way we always have. At least that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. So at this point, it's council's privilege that we would.
As far as I'm concerned, I like all these. We need to proceed. I agree.
So I think you have direction from council?
I'd like a motion if you would.
I'll move
you
for
do.
that. I'll so move.
Yeah, no, I know. Thank you. All right, I thought you did, I'm sorry, I didn't know we wanted a motion for
Oh,
this.
I didn't either. I thought it was just-
Okay, so I need a motion then that what we're gonna do, or, no, I don't, I'm sorry, like public counsel. No, I didn't have a motion yet. I said, originally I was just directing staff to act on council's action. And at this point, though, staff has asked for a motion. So what I'm gonna do is open it up to the public for comments first, and then we'll make a motion. Thank you.
Stan Morris, Historic Main Street, and paying a fortune for the privilege of staying at the Carey House Hotel.
The single room occupancy.
Now I have a nice suite with 3 beautiful windows overlooking Main
Oh, I thought you
Street.
said 3 beautiful women. I was gonna say, man.
No, then I would be, then
Never
I
mind.
couldn't, then I certainly couldn't afford to live there.
Right.
To stay there. I'm just a visitor paying paying as a regular hotel guest, but maybe a little better deal. But speaking from cultural and historical preservation, I appreciated Carol's comments about retaining and working towards retaining some kind of a presence with the courts at that building. That's been the site of El Dorado County's Superior Courthouse going way back to the Gold Rush. I would strongly suggest that this committee, of course, we've got to deal with the issue, but that this committee make the lobbying and the possibility of some kind of court, either traffic court, family court, maybe even the police station can have a presence there, but lobby for that and make that a big part of this Blue Ribbon Committee, to not just proceed ahead with thinking that there's no possibility. I mean, miracles do happen, and certainly that building could be used for traffic court, for family court. There is family court in there right now. I would even love to see you fight for keeping it as a criminal court. I've attended many trials there as a amateur journalist, sitting with the reporters, many times, even some coming up from Sacramento. I've seen what goes on there. That's an important asset, not only historically and culturally, but it's also economically really important for the city of Placerville to keep that presence there. Now, if you had a theater or a museum or something like that, I'm not sure that you'd be bringing in the amount of economic income, assets that are coming there during you have lawyers and many people staying in this city to attend those trials, and people that have incomes that are providing a lot more than just a general tourist would. So please make this Blue Ribbon Committee or make the lobbying for keeping some kind of a presence part of this Blue Ribbon Committee. Thank you.
Kirk Smith, Placerville. I've been before you periodically on the same issue for 3 years. And one of the proposals was to do what you're doing now. However, the way you're starting off, you short-circuited the process by not, as Stan said, including some of these other options, ways to keep the building. I would suggest at the very least you table it. Why? This is a subject of immense importance culturally and financially to this community. And you only got 2 people in the audience on election night when it's the last item on the calendar. And how did anybody know about it? Because they get the agenda. So it's not going to look good. I mean, you at least have to come up with the pretense, the image that you're listening to people. So that's one reason to continue it, so that you get a chance for more input. When you talk about the idea of looking at other options, remember that you already have an economic advisory committee that came up with a couple of proposals for that very building. One of them was a Center for Arts. The other was a museum, a city museum. Well, that building is about the same size as the City Museum in the District of Columbia and the Carnegie Library. That's been in operation for 10 years, where there is plenty of parking, plenty of transportation. the heart of the town, and subways, which you don't have, and they're losing $1 million a year because that's how much it costs out of the taxpayer's pocket to keep it going. So some of these ideas you're going to get from casual people without the financial resources, the analysts to come up with, you're just going to get more pie in the sky kind of ideas. I'm troubled by the idea that we casually hear this talk, that the building can't be saved. When your record on the subject, no offense, but let's just look at recent history and show how miracles have happened. Number one, you had an affidavit from the city supporting a demolition of the Hangman's Tree building, stating that it had no cultural or historical value. And yet, with Wendy Thomas and Mark Acuna, you very adroitly turned that around when you read the tea leaves, but it was seamlessly a nice turnaround. Some of you have talked, and I've heard you because I've been raising this subject for
First of all,
Wait.
I'm gonna stop you right now. Just go ahead and sit down, because I'm gonna answer your question on, you brought up the Herrick building. That was a proposal brought by the owner to demolish the building to the city, based on studies that he commissioned. So go ahead, and, no, I'm gonna interrupt you because you're running for office and you're pointing fingers at people at the council and saying we're doing things we shouldn't do. I'm sorry, but you need to sit down. I'm done. You're done. Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments to say? Comments? Thank you. Then I'm going to close the public hearing. We'll bring it back for a motion on this item.
Okay, I'm going to make my motion again, that we follow the recommendation of staff, and that we follow the recommendation of staff.
I'll second that.
Any comments, questions? Staff? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Passed. Motion passes. We're on item 12. Council reports from agency meetings. Transit Authority, I don't believe. Did you have a meeting? No.
No, but they're going to have, we're going to have a meeting this coming Thursday.
Okay. And Transportation Commission,
No.
we did not have a meeting. LAFCO, Ms. Patton.
I was out sick, I apologize.
Okay. And SACOG, we had a committee meeting, and those are items that are sent to the board for action. Nothing significant. Request for future agenda items. Anybody in the council?
I do.
SEDCOR, I'm going to ask Cleve, you've met with Randy
I'm sorry. SEDCOR was on.
about, he came over, I understand, the other day, and you want to discuss what's going on, why?
Well, there's a couple of things. Pierre and I have discussed several things with him. The main thing he wanted to discuss with us, though, was potential financing to assist with, I think what we're calling Paint What Matters Phase 2. Does that work?
Yeah.
But to continue some of those initiatives that were established during the Paint What Matters process of what we could do. And he's excited about it. We're working with him on it and looking at ways that maybe SEDCOR could assist possibly with financing and help that process.
Great.
So.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Request for future agenda items?
I do. I have one.
Yes.
If I would ask that maybe after we had the discussion on the EIR and everybody had their comments, and I know that they're free to add written comments and those have to be looked at, but I'd like to bring it up that I think that in there it should be included that we look at the option of doing the bridge with no realignment in addition to the realignment stop sign and realignment stoplight. If you guys are open.
Aren't we far down that road? I mean,
I don't,
is that even feasible?
About staff.
no, I don't.
Sorry, Pierre.
It certainly is feasible, but you're looking at costs involved. We would have to do change orders with PMC. We would have to modify the budgeted amount to include additional alternatives that's above and beyond what constitutes the project description that's proposed to be analyzed in the EIR.
How much more?
I don't know. We'd have to get an estimate from PMC.
But if they're doing the report, won't they consider alternatives?
They are considering alternatives. We have the project, we have a no project alternative, and then we have the two options for the intersection. We have an intersection option comprising four-way stop and then a signalized intersection.
So that might be presented, might take.
Well, I think that what is being requested, I don't think, we can't discuss this now, but she's requesting that as an agenda item for the next
Right.
meeting. To consider whether or not we should add that as an alternative. Is that right?
That's
Councilmember
right. I
Wilkins?
was trying to bring it back that we can have a
And,
discussion.
we could do that and bring back the cost. Pierre may be right, there may be significant costs. I don't think so, because we're already looking at replacing the bridge. We know what those impacts are. And we're looking at a no-build alternative, so we already know what it would be if we did nothing to the road, which is what this would do. So I don't think there's gonna be a significant cost to look at this as an alternative, but it is something we would have to talk to the consultant about and determine.
In the same vein, if, once the EIR is completed, if we decided to build a two-lane bridge and we built a separate structure for bicycles and pedestrians, and therefore reducing the size of the bridge, that isn't that indirectly one of the options, because we're somewhere between no build and adjustment, that we'd go back in and a minor adjustment to the EIR could be made at that some point in time? I don't know if that's a question for Pierre or technical. Sounds kind of silly to me, but it seems like you're
There's always the options following the city council's certification of the EIR. Basically, when you certify the EIR, you're certifying that it was completed in conformance with the California Environmental Quality Act. It's not to say that the project can be redefined or modified later, and then we would have the option of doing either an addendum or a supplemental EIR.
Would this would delay the EIR?
It's not going to delay the EIR, but once the EIR is certified, if the project gets changed and the new project description isn't within the scope of what the EIR considered, we would then look at doing either an addendum or a supplemental EIR to consider the revised project.
So, yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. So generally, to make it slightly smaller, to still within the same footprints, you're making an addendum to an existing EIR. Okay, let's leave it at that. So would you like to bring it back for discussion?
No, we've been here before. We've been here for 6-7 years, and I'd like to finish the EIR process and then go from there as to what makes sense.
Okay.
That's just my viewpoint.
We
could rehash this till the cows come home.
It's my viewpoint too.
I agree.
Okay. There were no items pulled.
One thing I would like to say is that, hallelujah, the project on Highway 50 right outside the windows of City Hall is almost completed, I
Should be
think.
done tonight.
They're going to do the striping tonight, I think, and it's looking very, very nice.
That's good,
yeah. Staff reports or city manager reports? Okay, upcoming items, tentatively scheduled for the next regular scheduled city council meeting, hotel feasibility study, Measure J report, and award-winning contracts, awarding the contracts, award-winning
Wow, we're getting a real classic.
for Broadway pedestrian improvements. Therefore, at this point, anything else, sir? Mr. Morris? Okay, adjournment till the next meeting on September 23rd, 5 PM. Closed session, 6 PM, regular session. Thank you.